So we're starting here. Welcome everyone. This is Striking Gold, the From the Vault Anniversary 10 Duels edition. I'm here with Show and our Gold Striker, Andrew Bot 5. I'm gonna call you Andrew
Just
from here on
Andrew's
out.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get started. Congrats. Based on the placement, I think fourth was correct, right?
Technically, yeah, but like once you get to top four, everything gets murky. We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, I put in the parentheses of that round scuffed pod.
It was whack.
Well,
I'll tell you that
I've
much.
I've I've heard that top 16 was also similarly whack. So
Yeah.
we'll get there.
We'll dive into that later.
All right. So um for
One thing to mention while
yeah,
we
man.
had the record up ahead of time.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of going drawless.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely, buddy.
Across 8 rounds of Swiss, having every game end, and more importantly, I think I didn't even have many games that had time called.
That's
Like I
awesome.
was one of the first or second top 16 pods done, and then the top four ended. So all the untimed rounds weren't even my untimed rounds weren't very long, and the Swiss rounds I just felt really positively about the fact that like I was kind of getting games over with and I wasn't drawing things out.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I just a little bit of an anecdote there. I think where like my approach to the deck that we'll talk about next when we do cards and stuff is definitely one that tries to end the game, and I felt very accomplished in that regard.
And
Certainly.
your stuff is a lot similar to Gustavo, who's also from that area, if I remember
I
right.
was gonna say, well, when we get into the why I started playing Magda, that he gets a shout out.
Uh-huh.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to start with background, we don't normally do that, and probably should try to include that in the
Yeah, we don't normally do background stuff, but
yeah. But let's
yeah,
I
talk
saw
about
I
it
it.
mean,
in the
sound off.
last episode.
Oh, it
Huh.
probably was prompted by just how the conversation flowed.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, because he was the fishbowl guy had been playing Magda from the original fishbowl and had top forward like most of the fishbowls.
Mhm.
So,
Gotcha.
um,
I've been playing it at these from the vault events at the Mana Vault, which are comparable in terms of like their top deck gold events, I think. I don't know if the fishbowl is gold or higher.
I'm
But I
pretty
was
sure
doing
it
some
was like
snooping when I
diamond.
was yeah, I was doing some snooping when I was looking the other day while watching that episode. But the a little bit of background I think would be nice just to kind of explain
Sure.
some of the card choices. So maybe we could get into it there because I think that is where it fits the best in the um,
Grand scheme
kind of
of things.
structure of
Sure.
things. Yeah,
Well, thanks for that feedback. I appreciate it.
for me at least. The
Sure.
the other people's background maybe not.
Okay. So, aside from what you're doing normally with the deck, did you do any specific prep for this tournament?
No, the Madison scene, Madison, Wisconsin is where I am right now, and the From the Vault events are in Milwaukee. So almost everyone from Madison who is available drives over. And so our Madison play group just like we don't do like real testing per se, but we have Thursday night like CDH nights at one of our shops.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically every other night of the week, somebody is hosting a pod at their house of just like CDH play that you can kind of jump into.
That's nice.
And thankfully, I am enfranchised enough and pay attention enough to the scene to kind of know who's serious and who's just there to jam, you know?
Sure.
And so I try and participate when I can tell it's going to be a good group. And my prep is really just like playing the deck. I make a lot of card changes based on play experience
Mm-hmm.
and love to pull up my Moxfield page like 2 hours after I get home from one of those and just like, sit and stare and think.
Okay.
So I think my prep is really just playing cards, casting Magda and trying to assemble 5 treasures and seeing how things go from there.
So
Sure.
would you say you were very much a buy field player rather than the mathematics of deck building?
Well, I appreciate the mathematics of deck building in terms of um, cards that it matters for. Cards that have a stricter cost, I think are easier to talk about mathematics with. I started playing CDH with Winota, right? And one of the things that I hate about that deck is there's no way to build the list that is acceptable mathematically, in my opinion. The only thing that I am like a rigorously like analytical player about is deck building, and specifically like deck building requirements that make you have a certain or require you to have a certain density of other things, right? Um,
Redundancy is very
the
important.
Yep.
like number of lands if you're playing Mox Diamond,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
But the anecdote from Winota and the reason that I have stopped playing that deck is like the closest you can get to a functional like analytical breakdown of what the correct number of humans versus non-humans to play to like trigger your commander and then flip into with your commander is like to have the right amount to see maybe one or two in your opening hand. You want to play like 25-ish non-humans, and then to get a vague like to even approach like an acceptable number of flips that you're going to hit in your deck, you have to play like roughly 25 humans, and it's like that's 50 slots of the deck, and you can't really like say that the vibes based analysis is wrong there when you're like, oh, 25 and 25 is fine because the math backs it up. But if you look at the math and you care about the consistency, it just doesn't follow through. So my prep being vibes based is backed up by my understanding of what I think is good deck building and kind of rigorous study. But I think that comes from a certain level of like experience. You can't just vibes based deck build your way into a good list and then easily top four if it's your first time picking up the deck. You have to kind of understand some central conceits of the deck to be able to be a vibes based player and have done some math on the back end before you can start hand waving it away is how I would answer that.
The word that you said, you have to concede something, and that's like something that some of us struggled with a while ago. Like we didn't want to concede anything. We wanted answers to everything. But the way that you have to build this deck, whether it's the way that you build it, the way that I build it, the way that Joe Smo builds it, you have to decide what is okay to not be there or what you're okay having less consistency for.
Agreed.
And, figuring out what concessions you want to make as a player is very important.
Yeah.
And, some of those is not having a backup line and just, being all in on a particular.
We'll get to that.
We're doing a lot of getting ahead of ourselves.
Right, absolutely. So as far as your scene is concerned, actually, I am getting ahead of myself even right now. Did you do any like very specific last minute changes, or like what was a recent change that you did right before the tournament?
I have the list I played at the tournament open. I think my creature suite is mostly the same from then to now. The one card that I have like one creature flex slot in the deck, and on the drive over, I decided that from what I had seen a lot of the Madison games play out as, I wanted a powerful beater, so something that like pressures life total, that acted as a value engine that would be able to kind of like catch me up after Magda had died once or twice. And my play pattern for that is to only really ever cast 6 mana Magda with 5 treasures already in play, and have the deck kind of built to incidentally make a couple of like game objects that I can leverage, that like the treasures I'm really just treating as textless artifacts once Magda's died twice, until she's able to come out and turn them into a real game piece.
Right.
And for that, I slotted in on the drive to Milwaukee. I had my like deck list fresh in my mind, and I was just doing some like final analysis, and I ended up going for Cavern Horde Dragon, as my like flying beater that is a value engine. And I don't think it really panned out. I saw it in one game and it did its job as described, but like I didn't really ever want to top deck it very often. And I think the games where your opponents have 7 artifacts in play already, or specifically like one opponent has 7 artifacts in play, it's like it's hard to catch back up there a lot of times. So I don't think it's super panned out. The other interesting
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since we're talking about Cavern Horde Dragon, it's interesting that you mentioned that you don't like the idea of top decking it, right? It doesn't feel good in a lot of situations, but also the card needs very, very, very specific scenarios early game to even be played. So like a card that to me doesn't feel good in my opening hand, and half the time I don't want to top deck it, like there's a lot of risk to playing something like that.
And I wouldn't even say it's like, I don't even think my meta at least is not
Purple Cannon
one
Pots?
where I'm afraid of like I'm never trying to cast that card also for like 2 mana. I think that card is like, if you think of it as like a 4 mana spell, that's really achievable. Somebody having like 5 artifacts is also more likely to happen. So I'm not trying to really like think of that card as a like, you know, the best case. It's like in the mediocre case, I actually love having it as the 7th card in a like decent 7 card hand. But what I ran into is like it's like a really fine card in seat 2, but like you don't ever really want like fine cards in seat 2, where you're trying to like play a fair game as the table develops value. It just doesn't work out for kind of what I wanted to play the deck as.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Next up on my list of specific changes is I have a player. Well, okay. The Madison scene has a weird level of politicking and yap that happens. And one of the reasons for this is that Sam Black and Gustavo have both always championed the occasional inclusion of Emrakul the Aeon, or Emrakul the Promised End, in like big mana creature decks, where it's easy to turn on like the Delirium cost reduction. So sometimes you just like Mindslaver an opponent and manipulate the game state where, you know, they would win, but because you're controlling their turn, you kill the other 2 players at the table and then yourself, and then like the yourself being the other player means that you win the game. It gets weird. But the reason that I say this is I thought as a politicking tool, Mindslaver would be a really fun include, because 1 Magda activation and a couple of extra mana is really easy to kind of hold up passing into someone else's turn. And then say the game state changes, somebody feeds a Rhystic Study a ton, and you're just like, okay, this Rogsai player looks like they're about to win. Like maybe their hands are shaking a little, and like you can read that they're excited to Demonic Tutor, Oracle Consult on their turn. So you tell the remaining players, like, let me activate Magda unmolested, and I will get Mindslaver and screw them over, or get Mindslaver and like do something else. And a lot of people, in my experience, are like, they're kind of hyped by that idea of like taking someone else's turn is so exciting and so novel that you can play into what people want to let you do to get a powerful effect that you might not get away with. So I put Mindslaver in the deck on the drive over to Milwaukee, and I didn't see it all day. There was never a moment where like it actually hit the field, but I did use it as a political tool multiple times. And there were a couple of times where like convincing someone else to not, or to stop the player who's really far ahead from letting me back into the game might have made a difference, but ended up like not being meaningful. So I never went and got Mindslaver and did the thing. But it was really neat to like say, I have Mindslaver in the deck, I could do this, and then let people kind of figure it out from there.
I've definitely been trying to explore the slot in the deck that gives everyone a comfort search, right? Or gives two of the players at the table a comfort search. A search they're comfortable not blowing Magda the hell out over. Because it'll basically be taking you off 5 treasures and the other player off their game plan completely.
Yeah, it's like the other best thing is One Ring.
Right.
People don't want to be given mono red card draw half the time.
Yeah, but like if you tell the table you're like, I'm just gonna get the One Ring, they're like, oh well, then I'll save my removal spell for Kinnan. Like,
right, and that's kind of what you want to do. You want to wait until Kinnan has exhausted everyone, and now you have 5 more cards in your hand.
And you can play that like parasitic game plan, but I'm not trying to lean into that. And I think what I realized while playing the tournament is like games where you're saying, don't kill Magda, I need to Mindslaver the player that's really far ahead, are games that are really hard to win because then the player that's really far ahead just kills Magda. Like you're convincing the player that has the like least ability to help you, or the other 2 players at the table who are not in a driver's seat position, which I don't think is really the right approach. 3v1ing is powerful, but having been on the receiving end, it's like it's kind of a 50-50 of whether it works or not.
Right, because you just don't have as many tools as the average deck does to weather any kind of storm from that kind of
right. And Mindslaver's like you have to hold up an activation and then 4 mana. It's a lot of work, and I don't think it's worth including in the deck. But it was fun, and I might put it in for certain like smaller local events where I can yap more effectively. I don't think I would bring it to like a large open field.
All right. So let's go on to meta. What does the Milwaukee-Madison area look like for you in terms of what you're expecting to see a lot of?
We used to have a lot more Rogsai. There's been a little bit of a downturn as people explore Thras piles. There's always a pretty good chance that you'll see really enfranchised T&K players and really enfranchised Kinnan players who are trying to tournament grind and sweat. And the fact that something like, a third of the top 50 either ELO or top deck points players are like Midwestern regulars who drove in for this particular event because of the big prize pool. And the fact that it was a diamond event is like, I think for this tournament in particular, I saw basically all of the top meta commanders in kind of the amounts I would expect. There was a good mix of like partner value piles, Kinnans, the occasional rogue deck, lots of T&K, and the kind of regulars that I paired into were all on, I think, pretty normal stuff is the thing. So I say normal like to kind of explain, I guess, there's the occasional like regular who plays these events who like swaps their deck to some off meta brew last second. And I didn't happen to sit down at the table with one of them who actually had done that. But what they did is they built like instant and sorcery, like spell combo based Magda, which I thought was wild.
Oh, they did the what's the Magecraft Magda, basically?
It's like it's not the Magecraft Magda. It's they played literally the Magda deck, but they just wanted to play like Fork J-Will type effects. They were playing like Fork Reverberate and a bunch of other kind of like spell combos, and like Dualcaster Twin Flame stacks, and just like stuff that you kind of would be able to kind of like jam a win without being as face up on the table. And I talked to them a lot after the tournament, and they seemed to kind of want to do it for the wrong reasons, which is like, yeah, it's not telegraphed, but like it's also not resilient, and it plays into what the meta has a lot of, which is counterspells. And so, I didn't run into a lot of the regulars from the Milwaukee scene who like switched to something off meta. I ran into people just like playing TNK.
Okay.
Which was fine.
I was gonna ask who it was and if we should tell Shake, but now that they didn't do great, maybe we don't tell Shake.
Yeah, Brandon's great. He's a fun guy from the Milwaukee scene, and I am interested to see where he takes the list once he like plays it, because he is also one of the people that plays at the same shop at their like Friday night league events that they do. And so he'll get a lot of testing if he wants to play his Magda list and like, you know, develop a sense of like, okay, I want to play the deck this way. And it might open up some avenues for me to think about cards differently, because already I can tell you like the Madison school of thought on Magda is different from the kind of like prevalent school of thought in the Discord.
Right.
And I'm interested to see kind of where we continue to innovate up here in the Great Cheese Land.
And I'm glad y'all are doing well, right? Even like my favorite thing about Magda is that there's a lot of interesting build paths that tend to, you know, pay dividends. And
yeah, having a 0 mana tutor to the battlefield in the command zone will do wonders for you.
It's pretty great. So I'm glad that people can just kind of play the meta busting or maybe comfort pile that they like and it still do pretty well. It's good. It's good for innovation. It's good for brewer's advantage with a different piles, different packages, and it's good for the deck's like longevity because people are going to be innovating until the heat death of the universe.
Yep.
All right. Before we press on the deck list, did any matchup like surprise you in how tough it was, or what was the hardest matchup for you?
I think the hardest like individual matchup for me was it's hard to say a certain like deck, sure, but basically people who could yap as well as I could. There was when we get to round 3, I'll have a really like deep dive into why I feel this way, but like round 2 I was able to really hold my own in terms of like table talking and game state like manipulating and things like that. And the then when we got to round 3, I just felt like completely outclassed, and there were a couple spots throughout the day where like somebody was able to kind of like turn the discussion in a direction that I couldn't deal with, and I felt kind of like shut out, where it's like, okay, I don't know how to handle that particular like line of inquiry. And so the matchup that I feel like I lost was not to a certain deck. I feel like I had a lot of game against every deck I played.
Sure.
Whether or not I, you know, got those in my very aggressive mulligans, I don't think I drew the right cards, and I think I have a couple of changes from this event. But if you want a like deck, I think my sense of what was weakest was just what I lost to the fastest, which was TNK almost every time.
Okay, that makes sense.
The ROG size at this tournament seemed to get a pretty reasonable amount of hate from the room, so that I didn't have to like pile it on, and they weren't doing super well. But the TNK players seem to be doing great off of the power of mostly Esper Sentinel. That card is gross.
It is very good. We love it. We should be saving our Galvanic Blast for that.
When they cost 2 mana or a mana and a card, they're not even that good.
Yeah. So let's press on to the deck building. Yeah. Thanks for all that theory. It's good for to set the tone and give us some backdrop for what we're going into.
I will be continuing to yap about theory.
That's good.
In the deck building section.
Good.
Theory is the most important part, because that's where the biggest divergence in mindset is between players.
Oh yeah. So you ready for some theory drop? Because I'm about to get on my soapbox if you don't have anything to start with.
Let's do that, and then we'll talk about individuals. Let's do it.
Great. So the best way to summarize what I think differentiates Madison, Wisconsin from the rest of the field is one Brazilian man. Gustavo has really like revolutionized how I think about playing CEDH as a format with his particular take on Magda, at least when I originally played it back in, goodness gracious, like early 2023. So I think that means I've been playing Magda like on and off for 2 years. But maybe my timing is off and it was like middle of 2023. But either way, I picked up his Magda list at a local and hit the proverbial crack pipe of turn 1 Karn, turn 2 Magda, Kirstmere, or Magda, play Kirstmere from hand, copy Dockside after somebody else had jammed their Dockside into my Karn and just like sat 7 treasures in play for me to take advantage of. And like that kind of drug of choice of being able to be like, one opponent makes a small mistake and we slam the door shut on the game.
Yep.
It kind of got me like interested in the deck. And one of the things that I think the philosophy about the deck that really crystallized for me was what Gustavo ended up putting into words to me a lot later, which is that if you're going to play Magda and you're going to play a list of Magda that I think is the best, which is any like Stax based list, any list that puts 3-ball into the deck and puts Tanglewire into the deck in some way, you want these cards, these Stax effects, to not really like stop your opponents from winning. You want these effects to stop your opponents from playing the game. And if they don't do that, they really should stop your opponents from interacting with you when you try and win the game. So you've got kind of this like tiered approach of like, what is a card that stops your opponents from interacting with you alone? It's Defense Grid is like the mono red effect that does that kind of. We don't get like actual silences, but we get Defense Grid, and I don't think that card's very good because you can't play it out and then like have it come back around to your turn and then utilize the effect.
It's like
and then there are Stax pieces.
You can just pass the game to someone else.
Exactly. And then there's Stax and Torpor Orb, another case of like a Stax piece that you can play out proactively, but doesn't really do anything. Turns off a couple pieces turns off a couple cards in our deck. And like, yeah, it's important to maybe have it in the deck to stop people from winning, but it's really this like stylistic approach of saying, this is 2 mana that doesn't advance my game and doesn't really like do much besides turning off a couple of win cons. And so the Stax approach is like, I want to slam the door closed in my opponent's face and say like, if this Stax piece resolves, you're not casting spells. The Blood Moon effect. It's like, there's a reason that everybody knows Blood Moon in a mono red deck is good. But the reason that Blood Moon in a mono red deck is good is because it stops your opponents from playing the game. And I want the rest of the deck to do that, kind of as an approach to deck building philosophy and why I play a lot of certain cards and what I think the Gustavo school of thought is on the deck, which is that it's okay to be face up if your opponents just can't stop you.
So very much the Turbo Stax mindset.
It's a Turbo Stax mindset, but it's like a Turbo Stax mindset that isn't just playing to slow the game down. Right? People think about Stax players as like, you know, I just don't want my opponents casting spells. I just want to sit here and like talk. And every Stax player like really just wants to draw their way into the top 16 or whatever and then take home min cash. It's like, no, I went drawless at this tournament playing a Stax deck with the intent to end these god dang games. Like, I don't want to draw things out. I don't want to really like slow my opponents down in a sense of like letting them do the thing, but just making them work for it. I want them to stop playing Magic so that I get 5 points at the end of the round.
Right.
So based on like the whole idea of like, you know, thinking about it as a Turbo Stax situation or a Turbo Stax mentality, because Dockside is gone, it doesn't seem like Turbo Stax exists anymore. So as an example, in your list versus the Magnomicon, the Magnomicons on both Lotus Petal and Simeon, which allow you to get very explosive starts in some situations. Chrome Mox as well. You're instead on Mox Diamond and Mox Amber, which Mox Amber doesn't help you recast Magda. However, your mindset is that if Magda shouldn't be dying, so this should be online, and if she is dying, well, I'm gonna be trying to get treasures in another manner until she can come in and win me the game. Is that accurate?
That's kind of accurate. I think the other reason that I like Mox Amber is we have a decently high like legendary count. There's not a ton, but like you can usually count on at least having your Mox tap for a mana here or there when it's the Mox Amber. And the other thing is like I'm a fan of lands. I'm a fan of the ability, I think, to bounce back through like one or maybe two pieces of really targeted premium removal in this deck is underrated. I don't want to build this deck as a glass cannon, and I think Lotus Petal and SSG to some degree are both like as temporary sources of mana, like just terrible when it comes to rebuilding, because like you spend all of these cards from your hand to do a thing, and then what I found happening a lot of times, and the reason why I don't think I've ever put those cards in my deck. I've always thought about it, and I have an original printing foil of Simian Spirit Guide from my Winota days. It's like it's burning a hole in my pocket. I want to play that card. I just can't get myself to go permanently down a card for exactly 1 mana once. Like it just doesn't make a lot of sense in this deck where so much value is accrued by either having your game pieces stick around as just like squares of cardboard to tap to clock later, or the like secret hidden mode of some of the cards that is just like, these are things I can fake a red blast in my hand. Like there's a lot of benefit, I think, to either choosing to not play your Mox or playing your Mox and being okay if it's off. Like if it's a Mox Amber, for example. So I agree with you that the idea of like turbo stacks not existing is interesting, because I don't want to think of this as a turbo deck in the sense that I'm committing a lot of resources to a really explosive one turn. I want to think of this as a like rocket powered snowball rolling down a hill is maybe a better like visual metaphor of like, once you kickstart the process, your explosive turn 1 should really set you up to slam the door closed on the game in the turn 2, turn 3 like realm. And the games where you don't have an explosive turn 1, or your explosive turn 1 is not as good because you're in seat 4, it's like those are games where you'll just approach the style differently, and you won't necessarily try and power something out because you know that it won't really be able to hold up if somebody disrupts the house of cards. So for me, my kind of philosophy when it comes to like whether or not this is turbo stacks is like, not really, because I'm not trying to turbo. I play a lot of expensive like 4 mana spells that don't really do anything besides like stop opponents from doing really powerful things so that I can win the game without needing to cast spells, right? Like if you are able to stop your opponents casting spells, the world's your oyster. We don't need to cast spells to win. That's a huge advantage. I think it's one of the things that Sisay decks and Magda decks, there's a reason that people view them really similarly, and it's like that axis of saying like, I just don't need to cast spells.
So specifically like talking about 3-ball, when are you looking to deploy it? Because like the way that like as a mid-range player, my approach to that card is always, if I'm playing it on turn 1, I'm putting myself in a very bad position. Because, my 1-drop dwarves are going to end up costing 3 mana. My interaction's always going to be costing more, and it doesn't necessarily always stop your opponents from being able to do what they want to do, unless you're like in an early seat.
Yeah, And that's exactly what I had prepared for this inevitable question, which is I don't think that it is almost ever right to turn one a 3 ball in seat 4. I think like if everybody else has the opportunity to play a dork or a rock before you, and the only spell you cast on turn 1 is 3 ball, you are just locking yourself out of the game, because then everybody else is a turn up on you in the like now very slow arms race through the 3 ball.
Right.
What I've ended up thinking about is like there was a top 4 pod that I made at the vault back in October, where I think it ended up being really correct to turn one a 3 ball when I couldn't even get Magda out first. And the reason that I think it was correct in hindsight was that, you know, I was able to see what people had in their hands after the game and whatever. But in the moment, I made the decision making to kind of like fire off a turn 1 3 ball because I was seat 1. And because it's like, okay, if you're going to play 3 ball, it's either because it's turn 1 and you are like kind of leveraging the fact that you can maybe deploy your own mocks underneath it and you're seat 1 so that nobody else gets the chance to. Or, you know, there are the crazy like miracle hands where you're able to like Magda 3 ball on turn 1, and that's crazy and that almost never happens. But the rare case is like all of your stacks pieces past a certain point just like double as like mini defense grid kind of. So there's this leverage piece like of playing them from your hand at opportune times as like mini defense grid effects or mini silence effects that are really useful when you read that an opponent is holding up interaction for you. But beyond that, it's like, I don't know, the idea of playing stacks is really like you can't just jam stacks pieces that shut your opponents out of the game unless you are already ahead or are about to win. Those are like the 2 times to play them. And I think a lot of people who pick up the Stax Magda lists will just like cast the shiny spells in their hand and be like, Stax isn't for me. But like, I don't know, you gotta think about it a little more.
So like the way that I took what you said is that your approach is like unless it completely shuts your opponents out or it acts as a pseudo defense grid that makes them using a deadly rollick or whatever a little bit more taxing, then Trinisphere doesn't really do as much for you as you might like, and you are okay making the concession of that card is stuck in my hand because it's not okay to be played in this board state. But
Yes,
you
but
want it
like
because of the strength that it has in very particular situations.
the other thing is like I thinking about Magic as a game like more broadly for a second, like red decks can leverage fast mana that other colors don't have. You know, we don't play a lot of it, but I think we play the good fast mana artifacts that every other deck does get advantage to. And we just have to think like a red player where the goal with a lot of these stacks pieces is to get ahead and then play a stacks piece or play a stacks piece that doesn't affect you. One of the things is like I will turn one a thorn way more often than I'll turn one a 3 ball with nothing else to do on turn 1, because like worst case I just start casting 1-drops like under the thorn. That's great. And so it's hard to say with any like kind of like decisiveness the right way to play a certain stacks piece. You have to look at the pod composition and you have to have some play experience and you have to know how many mulligans each player has taken, and more importantly it's like how many mulligans have I taken when you're looking at a hand and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to sequence this? Do I ship it back and look at one and like have one fewer card? I think I across 8 rounds kept a 7-card hand twice. Like I'm a big fan of mulliganing those awkward hands where it's like, yeah, I could turn one a 3-ball, but it doesn't do anything.
Right.
It's like a lot of this deck is really played out in the first 4 turns of the game. So you can think of it a little bit like Legacy Reanimator, where like the early game, quote unquote, is the mulligan phase. And that's where Stax pieces are really your benefit, because you get to see a little bit into the future and say, okay, whatever green partner pile is probably going to play a rock or a mana dork on turn 1, and T and K is probably going to play some draw engine, and it's like, okay, what does my hand have to do against that? And if the answer is I'm a seat behind them, I probably shouldn't play a 3-ball early. That makes it harder for me to play the game. And so there's these like layered decisions that all come in from other points of view, where it's like Stax is just more situational.
It's more skill
There's
testing.
a lot more decision making points.
Yeah. And
sometimes
mulliganing aggressively is a hard skill to learn too.
Well, especially when your deck has like 2 main game plans, right? You have the Stax game plan, and then you have the Magda Go game plan of just like the normal try to curve out dwarf Magda plus a vehicle or something, and then just
dwarf
go
Magda dwarf turn 3 Zorn, make 5 treasures. Like, it's great.
Yep.
But
the last thing I'll mention about like that kind of thought process too is the 2 game plans that you mentioned of like Stax game plan versus Magda Go game plan. What you really want to be doing as a player is like living in the overlap of the Venn diagrams, where you get to cast Magda and then stop everybody in the game, yourself sometimes included, from casting another spell. If there was a way to like play an artifact that just said like players can't cast spells, like we would put it in the deck for sure, and it would be in everyone's deck, because it's a like really potent Stax piece. If they ever print like a 12 mana artifact, it goes in every Magda deck, because players can't cast spells just benefits us so much. And when you think about some of your Stax pieces as like really powered down versions of that, you can approach deck building a different way. And it's why the Karn Lattice is still in the deck. It's why Uba Mask is still in the deck. There was a time when I put Knowledge Pool in the deck, because Vexing Bauble Knowledge Pool is a lock, right? Nobody can cast a spell. That's a great, like, you happen to play Vexing Bauble earlier in the game, you get to 5 treasures, you just windmill slam that Knowledge Pool out of your deck and start tapping dwarves. Like, you don't care about casting spells. So with that whole idea, it's like, the deck building philosophy always circles back to that one thing that Gustavo told me that one time of, your Stax pieces or your permanents should meaningfully hinder your opponent's ability to not just like win the game, but to cast spells in the first place, to play Magic as the world would have it.
Right. So, and it looks like your deck is very much just down on things that interact with attempted wins, because the things that stop them from playing Magic also stop them from winning the game because they couldn't play Magic.
Right. Like, I don't really want to ever Tybalt's Trickery and Underworld Breach, and then my opponent like flips into a Rhystic Study. It's like, oh wow, I've spent 2 mana to make sure that they untap in a better position. Like, I'm good.
Right.
I know that that's a really specific and like nightmare-y situation, and sometimes they just hit like a Mox Diamond. But like
I've hit the fail case into a Cannon's fucking Hullbreaker before, so I understand what you're saying.
There's a lot of cards in the deck that either, I think, there's a lot of cards in the Magdanomicon side of the slide right here that I think are really good, and that I would love to play if I had slots. And there are others that I just don't really think fit my style of playing the deck. Pyrokinesis, I love the card, but I would play Fury first, 1. And 2, like, I just don't want to go down cards to deal like just 4 damage. I think Return the Favor is great because it progresses our game plan, and I just put it back in the deck. I think, there are tons of individual cards that I could give impressions on, which we're about to move into.
Yep.
So like, as we take this kind of like me on my soapbox section to a close, I'll just say like, my philosophy is really to stop my opponents from first casting spells and then second winning the game. And it seems like there are a lot of card choices that maybe flip that. And we'll get into the individual cards, I guess.
Yep. So,
there's 2 more cards I want to discuss before we move over to the other.
Sure, that's fine.
One being Sphere of Resistance. You talked about how early game you're fine playing Thorn because it slows down opponents from casting their rocks. You're okay with their casting their dorks, like, because that's what you're looking to do under that thing as well, right?
Mhm.
When do you think that Sphere of Resistance is best?
Sphere of Resistance, weirdly, as much as it might sound counterintuitive, turn one 3 ball when it's the only thing you do is tough. Because oftentimes it's hard to follow up.
Mm-hmm.
But if you turn one a sphere, you've already made 2 mana on turn 1 somehow. And I'm not playing a lot of the effects that are not permanent mana sources. I'm not playing those Lotus Petals, and I'm not playing Lotus Petals or SSG. Right. So if I'm turn oneing a sphere, I can almost always cast a 1-drop the next turn at least. And so when I love Sphere is when I get to go like turn 1, Soul Ring, Sphere of Resistance. And I look at everybody else and they're like, Mox, Soul Ring, turn 1 Esper Sentinel, turn 1 Birds, hands, and they just are like passing. They're going land pass, land pass, land pass. Mm-hmm. Because they kept 1-drops or 0-drops or cards that are just like really bad with a sphere out.
Yep.
And so I think that's when that card really shines a lot, is when you're able to get it out in seat 1. As with any Stax piece, it's like it's gonna shine the most when you can play it seat 1. But Sphere in particular is just this really like specific niche card that I think encapsulates the idea of that Stax play pattern really well, where you have the kind of everything to show you how to play it written on the card. It's like this costs 2 and makes everyone else's stuff 1 more. So you're really trying to leverage it when you are 1 more than your opponents and you hit 2 really fast, often on turn 1.
Right.
So outside of seat 1, what are some circumstances that you feel the card shines?
As a mini defense grid. Those are really the only 2 uses. Like, I wouldn't just kind of like value cast a sphere if I was really trying in a tournament setting and paying attention and not just kind of like mentally boomed. I might have done it in the past, but I think it was probably the wrong play. And I've learned that like casting sphere on like turn 3 or turn 4 is oftentimes going to lose you the game if you're not careful. So again, take advantage of the fact that you can just like put it back in your deck before you start. Like
as
you can
far
just
as
mulligan.
mulligans go, right?
Yeah, you can just mulligan.
Yep.
You get to mulligan. It's the Tron player in Modern effect, right? If you've ever talked to there's some creator that like started saying this, but it got popular among Tron players. It's like everybody looks at it as like, oh dang, I have to mulligan this hand. It's like, no, you get to mulligan that hand.
Right.
It's a privilege.
6 is the magic number for me. Like, I'm never upset about going to 6 because, oh great, if I get like a really stupid card in hand that I'll never get to hard cast, and now I can't tutor it. No, I didn't. It's on the bottom of my deck, right?
Yeah,
and that's
we play a lot of dead cards.
And when you're in the Stax game plan, you kind of have to do that. Not only one because you need kind of purpose built hands, but also you need to ship cards that you know are not going to do anything against the pod or do anything against the seat position that you're in.
Yep.
So
you had one more.
Ragavan.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to also touch on Vexing Bauble a little bit after Ragavan, but even as a Stax player, you are one of few that still play Ragavan.
I like the monkey. I think that it says create a treasure on it, and it costs 1 mana, and that's really good enough for me. It's a permanent-based source of mana acceleration that is also a card advantage engine that also turns on my Mox Amber, that also makes a really meaningfully typed token for my deck, right? Like, there is no world I am ever cutting Ragavan from my deck unless they print one that is just a dwarf instead, and then I probably just play both, right?
Like that's, I mean, yeah, I think that'd be the play. Good God, more legendary dwarves that aren't Magda, please.
And then Bauble?
Vexing Bauble, yeah. So, like, there was a time where everyone was playing Vexing Bauble, and especially in lists that use it as a draw engine, like to close out combos, that's one of the main, like, upsides to it. But because our deck doesn't necessarily look to stop anything that's free outside of like Snuff Out or Deadly Rollick or things that will remove Magda or our Artifact Dwarf. Because this shuts down interaction from our opponents, what is your thought process outside of situations where you're playing this turn 1 and stopping people that kept greedy hands that have 0 mana rocks in them?
Vexing Bauble thankfully has that line of text that you mentioned for combo applications of like, if it's shutting off my opponents, like
You
we
can certainly
often
get rid of it, right? But like
yeah,
you're
like
then
we
forced to
often
hold up
are
mana.
1 mana in this deck that plays a ton of lands, my build especially, I am often passing the turn with 1 mana and nothing to use it on. So I don't view that as much of like a thing. I'm trying to play a lot of 1 mana interaction that is really potent, and I think a lot of people also are. One of the reasons why I'm not on a lot of the kind of interaction package that the rest of the Magda community seems to like is that it just doesn't cost 1 mana. I would rather play Rending Volley than Pyrokinesis is like a really key example here. Or, you know, a Stoke the Flames for 1 mana, sick. Versus a like any other kind of like burn spell is just going to be a lot worse. So I like my interaction, whether it be cracking my bauble to turn on someone else's Mindbreak Trap, or just Rending Volley. Like I like it to be 1 mana if I can have it. So I'm not worried about Bauble in that sense of like turning off other people's counter spells because you just sack it. It's not too big a deal.
Interesting that you're talking about Rending Volley because I was having a discussion with one of my locals the other day about it, and specifically because of the prevalence of Valley Floodcaller, the flash meta. That's a card that I think I'll be putting in my own deck again. Just the fact that it turns off all of the flash enablers outside of like 1. That it's very important, and also like even though Drannith isn't seen as often, having an answer to it is still good. And a 1 mana uncounterable answer to someone having a value Grand Abolisher that they put out hoping to get to their next turn is still like decent, right?
And you're forgetting 3 really lovely targets for the card, which are Kraum, Kinnan, Tymna.
Right.
Yep.
Like, or maybe not forgetting, like you hadn't gotten to those yet, but those are the reason why I think that card's a mainstay for me is like a lot of our worst matchups are the white and the blue decks, and 1 mana 4 damage is chef's kiss. Having uncounterable on top of it, sick, you know. Hitting a creature with ward, there aren't many. Like Tivit's the only one I can think of, and it wouldn't kill Tivit in the first place. But like hitting a creature with ward and they go ward trigger, and you're like, so what?
Right.
You can flare it.
True.
Oh,
I can 4 for 1 myself.
So if there's any particular cards that you want to talk about on the right side, you are welcome to. We'll get into the whole Battered Golem Maskwood Nexus stuff in a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
And outside of that, it's mostly just interaction, the fast mana that we talked about. You said you're back on Return the Favor. Not being on Untimely Malfunction is interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that's my 101st card right now.
Sure.
But going through the list real quick, after this tournament, I slotted in, or I like cut a bunch of the cards on the left and slotted in City of Traders, Return the Favor, Cursed Mirror, Goblin Engineer, Chrome Mox, Grafdigger's Cage.
You want to DM me your
from the
current
ones
list?
on the right.
Just so I can compare them myself.
Sure, if you want.
Because I have a backup of your old list from the tournament.
Yeah. That's what I also saved the backup copy. But the I made a lot of swaps because what I found myself doing play-wise was mulling for fast mana. And I was just like, as I said, I didn't keep... Which one of you asked me to DM you, by the way?
Show.
Okay, cool. The one that I already have open.
Yep.
But
I'm driving. I can't do much.
The reason that I put a bunch of the like mana back in that I could try and keep around that's like permanent based mana sources like the Chrome Mox and the City of Traders is like I would have kept so many more hands if my cards just made more mana in my mulligan decisions. So I think for me, it's like I asked myself at the end of the tournament, it's like, what was I mulliganing for, and can I switch cards in my deck to make that easier? And the answer was mana, and so I put more mana in the deck. It's like, great, this deck's mana hungry. I'm playing a bunch of 4-drops anyway. Like, City of Traders seems good.
So you went back up, Mirror the Forebears. You went on Chalice of the Void, because obviously we've talked to Boss about that, and that card, it shuts down so many win cons at the moment that like it's really
I'm Chalice's biggest hater, because casting it on anything other than 0 sucks. And the only reason you cast it on anything other than 0 is because it wasn't in your opening hand and you drew it later. And if you cast it on 0 later in the game, it's like, yes, it has the chance of, like, you know, they can't cast LED out of the bin. Great, that shuts down a couple win cons, whatever. But like, I don't know. I'm Chalice's biggest hater until you put it on 0 on turn 1.
Right.
Like, then I'm Chalice's biggest fan.
But if
and
you're
so
I'm
back
every game,
I'm back on it.
You should be. Yeah.
Right. But the other thing about Chalice that you're talking about using 3-ball as a defense grid is that Chalice makes it so that if you put Chalice on 1, your opponents can now no longer use most of their bounce spells outside of Submerge and whatchamacallit?
There are others.
Psycraft.
Yeah. I also love, if I ever am able to put a Chalice on 2 and have somebody overload a Psycraft into it, that'll be the day. The problem is putting Chalice on 2, like, that's the kind of, like, Queen's Gambit, like, risky play that I've done enough times and then gotten burned and cut Chalice.
Yeah.
I think I played a tournament where I was about to win the game. I put Chalice on 2, somebody killed Magda, and I was just like, oh,
yeah,
I cannot win the game now.
It's like pithing needling another Magda in the pod just because you're afraid that they're going to get ahead of you. It's like, nope, you just lose that game another way. Just lose the game the other way.
And so I think I'm back on Chalice with the understanding that, like, it really only has 2 modes, and it's like, yeah, the defense grid mode where it's 2 mana, turn off your 1 mana interaction, and either I win the game this turn or, like, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Or the play it on turn 1 on 0 as a turn off all your Moxen and LEDs or whatever.
So something I want to talk about relative to all the mana you're throwing in there is that I played a build similar to what you're describing. I had Torpor and Flute, and that's just more of a comfort thing. I've gotten very used to the mid-range reactive tempo game plan. But something that I noticed throughout the tournament, playing the Play to Win event, I was like, oh, I don't have to use all this mana. I don't have to, like, go crazy and try to sequence into a turn to empty my hand. I get to play this mana whenever I want, right? I get to play the City of Traders on turn 3 and not feel like I'm too slow. And that's something that having all that mana, like, gets you. It's not just the ability to go fast, it's the ability to go big on turn 3, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a very important part of, like, the kind of turbo Stax deck building, is that much like just jamming stacks that don't affect the pod the way you want them to, you can also just, you know, blow your load very early for not a whole lot of benefit when you could have been a little more strategic, developed better around what you had. And I think that having all of the... So you're talking about being on basically everything you could possibly be on, minus SSG and Lotus Petal, right?
I want my mana to stick around, yeah.
Right. I get that. I totally get it. I want more mana. I don't care where it comes from. And if... I know the math is kind of swung back around, or like the people's anecdotes on Diamond, regardless of the math, has kind of swung the conversation in a different direction, that I'm more open to talking about it or considering it.
The last card of the ones that you re-added that I think is important to talk about is Grafdigger's Cage. Because your particular list doesn't have as many ways to get rid of it.
Or play around it.
Or play around it. So what it's looking like to me is that if you somehow manage to get your artifact dwarf in play and you're able to single search clock or whatever, that you're, because you are a stacks plan, you're just like, cool, I'm going to stack you out. I'm cool going to my next turn with infinite treasures, and then I'll use the one ring to force myself to draw my Horde Master and then win that way, or
Right.
whatever. You don't necessarily, because you are a hard stack, feel like Grafdigger's Cage is something you need to play through. It's just something that, like, realistically hinders your opponents a lot more than yourself. I know that Gustavo for a while and a couple other pilots that were playing stacks didn't want to play Grafdigger's Cage because it took them off of Roaming Throne, which is very important for like some of the single tutor win conditions, where like you're getting a Roaming Throne on someone else's end step, and then you're like trying to push for your win on your own. So where do you stand on Grafdigger's Cage? Like outside of that, okay, if it's in play and I do find a way through it, I'm just stacking the board. Like what is the reason?
Yeah.
Like, is it ever something you're going to tutor for other than with Goblin Engineer? And is the downside of not having access to that Roaming Throne like something that, even though it's in your list, is still questionable? Or what's your approach currently?
My approach is that I'm probably never tutoring for it. I think 5 treasures for a Grafdigger's Cage is a really bad deal.
Yep. The threat is more useful than the utilization.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to cast it on turn 1.
Yeah.
The other thing is I would love if I could find one more slot and just put KCI back in the deck, because it makes those combo considerations much more trivial. I think right now I haven't played a game with Grafdigger's Cage in my deck and not had KCI. So if I'm running into a lot of cases where I can't win the game because I can't make infinite untapped treasures without tutoring a creature, and I'm stuck with infinite tapped treasures, then what I have to do is find a way to kind of like sit and think and look at the board state and figure it out from there. Because the easiest answer is to like, get a cursed mirror, copy something that lets me remove the Grafdigger's Cage. Great, that's totally doable. I could get I could get lucky and somebody else has a
Mangle.
No, he can't play. He can't make infinite treasures through Mangle. So,
right.
the way that his deck
yeah,
is set
yeah,
up.
of course, yeah, you're right.
Or what do you mean? I can't make infinite treasures through Mangle plus Cage, right?
No,
I have
you
to.
can't
I
start.
have to. I have to at least like kill the Manglehorn to start the loop,
Yep.
or find a way to get a second search. Right? It's like none of the one search win lines are gonna beat a couple of very specific stacks pieces, and I concede those points. I don't worry about it as much because I have fail cases that are powerful. What I'm kind of thinking about here is like most of the just artifacts I can get are good enough. Say I put, all of the just artifacts in play without the cage. I'm getting a cursed mirror for whatever's on the board, and I'm getting 2 portals, a lattice, a GPS, a 3-ball, like a bunch of stuff that like makes it so that the game just like passes around back to me, and I untap the treasures, and then the game's over. But the other thing is I'm just not worried about it, realistically. I have not seen that come up, and if it ends up being an issue, I'll just cut Cage, or I'll find a slot for KCI. Realistically, the other thing is, actually, I just put Spine back in. You spine your own Cage, not a big deal. So
Sure, but
there's
are there
ways to
not
like,
other considerations over spine and
right?
cage? Like
I think
there's Legion Extruder. There's, like you said, there's KCI. Like it's arguable that KCI has higher value than spine.
what I yeah
Outside of scenarios where you're
yeah
using spine to force draws.
I'm not even trying to use spine to force draws. I'm trying to use spine to explain. The reason that I cut it too is that I found myself using it to like explain away certain like pieces on the board that I could deal with once I made infinite treasures tapped or untapped. So
Sure.
I think the concept of cage is really interesting because I don't like having it in the deck, but it really is just a premium to have that powerful an effect on 1 mana. So it's like I want to try it, but I'm not convinced on it yet. It's one of those cards that I did put back in the deck, but I am ready to take out. I think if I cut Goblin Engineer, it comes out. I think if I play 2 rounds on of it tomorrow at at my like equivalent of a weekly local, which is just jamming 3 pods at the LGS down the road, like I'll probably just cut it if it burns me a couple times. I'm not sold on it. I'm not committed to it. It's just a card that I think is powerful, and if it ends up mattering a lot more in games that I play, I'll leave it in the deck. So I don't know. There's a certain amount of like I'm not sure is the best answer I can give you.
And then one more point of contention is your vehicle count.
Yeah,
You're on 4 vehicles.
right.
You were on 5 for the tournament, but now you're on 4. Is the consistency for 4 good enough? Because I'm not sure if we're talking about mathematically, it's
Pretty poor.
very good, right? It's to draw 1 or more by your 10th card is 35%.
Right. I have found that I don't reliably need vehicles to get to 5 treasures. I think instant speed's great. I think tapping outside of your own turn by going to combat is great. But what I kind of came up with was like Lifecraft Engine is stellar and is obviously the best vehicle in the deck. But
Right.
I don't think that playing more vehicles because you have Lifecraft in the deck is the correct choice either. And so my train of thought on this is like, I'm just short slots. None of the other vehicles are either good or cheap enough to play. Like, there are lots of good vehicles that cost 5 mana, and there are a lot of cheap vehicles that are just an outlet to tap your dwarves. And I don't really want to be putting either of those 2 cards in my deck. And so I play the ones that have a powerful enough effect at low enough mana cost and don't really sweat the rest. Because once you have one, the second one's really redundant. And the idea of like putting more in the deck because you're on Lifecraft really just didn't work out for me in terms of a thought process once I played with Lifecraft a bunch. When we get to the rounds of the tournament, like I'll tell you, I love Lifecraft. That card's gas. It was the like card of the game at least once, and I would love to see it in every opening hand moving forward. But you don't need a second vehicle when you have Lifecraft out already. So increasing the count because you're playing Lifecraft kind of seems backwards to me. It's like play the good ones and save the slots that the bad ones would take in your deck is my kind of approach to it.
So full disclosure, more or less no one who's on like 6 vehicles, 7 vehicles are doing it because Lifecraft exists. It's just one of those things where we were already running 6, and running 7 feels like you're getting more out of the card rather than less. Outside of the fact that you're using slots you don't have anymore, but we were already happy running 6 because of the consistency and the no less need to tap, right?
Yeah. What's the math? What number of vehicles do you have to play? I don't have my hypergeometric calculator open, so I'm stalling while I click around on my other screen.
Don't worry,
In order to get to what number? 50%?
I was gonna say 7 vehicles, right? What's the percentage?
7 vehicles is 53.7% going to turn 3, assuming you keep 7, or turn 4
Right.
if you've kept 6.
Great. I think that none of the vehicles that are commonly played are good enough game pieces on their own because I don't personally value the instant speed tapping as much when it's face up. Like, instant speed tapping that your opponents can see is immensely worse. And I guess the like better upside of vehicles is that all your dwarves have haste, right? Like Clown Car on 0 is one hell of a way to like think the deck is better than it is. But I think for me it's like I would rather try and make do with tapping my 1-drop dwarf on turn 2, tapping my 2-drop on turn 3, and you know, doing that kind of thing than playing worse cards when it comes to a lot of the vehicles that are cheap enough to play early, which is when they matter. So because the math increases it from like 35 to 50%, that doesn't feel like a real increase to me. It's like, okay, 50% of hands will draw a vehicle, but like you're not gonna see like your sample size of seeing a vehicle in your opening hand when you have a choice about whether or not you're going to keep a vehicle, that's even lower. And so it's like to be able to consistently mulligan to one, you'd have to be playing way more than we are. And I kind of just give up the conceit again, like as we talked about, it's like because we're limited to 100 slots, because the game exists the way it does today, we're all making deck building concessions, and one of mine is that I just will have fewer games where my dwarves have haste and can tap at instant speed.
You think that your approach to this also has to do with where you feel one of your strengths lies in your ability to politic? Because there are a lot of board states where we shouldn't be able to attack into profitably, right? Or do you just make that concession of, well, if this 1-drop dwarf dies here, I just need to make sure that the next time that I swing, I'm winning the game?
That's kind of how I approach it. You've summed it up well. Of like, I can trade off my board for a certain amount of advantage this turn to, you know, maybe stack up a enough treasures to win the game next turn. But what I've kind of had to play around is the idea that in those pods where my dwarves can't attack very profitably, I have to just kind of suck it up. And sometimes trade like a significant amount of board presence and potentially even like recasting Magda to get to 5 treasures, and I'm just kind of okay with that. The the reason that I think this is so useful to me personally is that nobody else in my meta that I can think of besides the like Kinnan players are really like playing creatures that trade profitably with dwarves at a rate where they can't, you know, profitably block 1 dwarf a turn. So what I end up having to do is a lot of times like swing out, understand that their 2/3 will block my 2/1, but that they don't really want to trade their Esper Sentinel for my enslaved dwarf. Like nobody looks at that trade and thinks they're coming out ahead.
Right.
And also,
They're
depending
good
on
piece
what
of
their value
cardboard.
piece is, if you have
Right.
mana up, they have to go, okay, do they have a way to remove my creature? And do I want them to spend it here? Or do I want them to have it for when someone else is trying to
And you
win?
can just say, "Hey, don't let me do it. I want to save this for Kinnan," and they're
One
gonna
of
say,
the
"Let me go through."
Yeah, one of the things that I really like about Siege Smash, a card that I'm not playing and still like have yet to cast ever, is that it's a buff spell. Like, and it plays that same kind of combat trick way of saying like, why are you attacking me? Do you have something that like is a trick here? You're holding up a bunch of mana. You have like 2 cards in hand that you've been holding on to all game. Your deck plays a bunch of weird effects that I don't understand. I'll just take 2. You've already made the treasure. You know, I'm gonna win on my turn. Like people just aren't incentivized to block, and all of your dwarves trade up. Magda gives them an extra power.
Live
Like
combinations.
underrated for the ability to just be all of my 1 mana shitters are Savannah Lions now. Like they're 2/1s. They
Siege
trade up.
Smash, personally, like, the card is always overperformed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to try it. I want to like find a slot. You know, maybe it's Grafdiggers, right? Maybe I just like I get burned by Grafdiggers twice tomorrow at the local and decide that for the next like testing play session, I just one for one slot. I have to go find a copy because I don't think I have it in my like maybe board pile of physical cards, but like I just play Siege Smash, and if it does well, it worms its way into my heart and I enjoy it.
All right. So if we don't start this, we'll be here till midnight. So
Yeah.
let's move on.
I'm okay with that.
Oh, me too. This has been really good. This has been really good. Because it took a long time. I was playing a very Turbo Stacks oriented game plan for a very long time since basically like the first year I was on the deck, and it basically took a show selling me Gadrak, or like show like say okay we're going to do tempo mid range. Here's a lot of it. We're building in this direction, and I started following him on it, and I liked the value, but I miss the pain. Like my opponent's groaning is like I'm like the monsters from Monster Inc. It is my energy. So I really enjoy the turn 2 or 3 windmill slam of Moon or 3 ball. So I like this.
We've covered a lot of the cards already in the next couple slides.
Yeah, we'll be.
So
Yeah, we can power through these.
Instead of going through the slides, let's just talk about Battered Golem and Maskwood Nexus.
Okay, we can start with the Maskwood list line, and then I do want to get back around to some of the other stuff. Do you have a slide that just brings those up so that there's a visual for people watching on YouTube?
Yeah, here.
And there's one that at least has Battered Golem on it.
Yeah, that'll be good enough.
I think that the reason I don't like Barry and Maskwood Nexus is that people know about them to a certain degree, and there are better ways of winning the game when you hit 10 treasures. I think that if you're worried about clock getting exiled, Shmeep, you play a fair game. Like, I don't know. If anybody Ragavans a clock, good beats.
It's happened to me a couple times.
Right, I have to, return the favor a demonic tutor to get Karn to pull it back out of exile, and then hard cast it and hope nobody counters it. Like, if I want to technically go infinite, but I could also just like portal, and then Lattice if I have a Karn already. So like I've won the game already that way, and I never needed the clock. So I think my approach to it is like, yeah, one Magda activation is sometimes interaction, and sometimes it's an I win button. And if something happens in a game of Magic that takes away your I win button, I would rather have 2 slots in my deck and 2 way better cards filling those slots than redundancy. Personally, I think that Barry and Maskwood Nexus are really good in terms of the ability to, play a vehicle, play Dwarven Blood Boiler, play all these tap outlets. It's like it's a 3 mana, it's a 3-piece combo, and I appreciate the need for resilience and the kind of like nightmare case of like clock just gets hard. Like I think the notable time for me was clock got hardcast Mindbreaked one game.
Yep.
And like just like out of nowhere, and I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm probably not winning that game anyway, right? Like if I have to hardcast clock and put it on the stack, and somebody has a counterspell and it ends up in my graveyard instead of exiled, it's like, okay, well,
for 10 treasures, you can go get Barkform Harvester, put it back in your deck, and then do the thing.
Right. And then like that's one thing, but it's like that's really hard. That's a lot of resources, and it's interesting to kind of compare the amount of investment that you have to get to actually like tutor both halves of the Barry Maskwood line. So I think Barry and Maskwood both shine in the sense that they are a combo piece that you can cast, right? Like they're 3 and 4 mana cards that you can just cast and then tutor the other half of. And I think that would be how I would want to play them in the future, is I would actually only play Barry if I was also playing Stridehanger, so I could draw them, one of the 2, and then go get the Nexus. is the idea. I don't want to think of those two as like, oh, I got to 10 treasures, now I can go infinite. It's like, if you got to 10 treasures, you've already won the game. Like, if you're resolving 2 Magda searches, they're cooked.
Right.
Depends on the
and
situation,
so,
right? Like, there's still those
yeah.
scenarios where there's like a blind obedience out, and you're just like, well, I have to go down this portal GPS sort of route.
And I think we're advantaged enough in those situations that I'm okay playing those games, because double portal, portal GPS, portal, like if I'm on it, like portal knowledge pool or knowledge pool vexing bauble even, like, or if I, or you know, I would love to have another like 2-card line be Uba Mask memory jar, but that doesn't quite work the way I want it to because they get the cards back. I don't know. There's a lot of other ways you can build the deck where like I'm okay not winning the game through blind obedience or Manglehorn with exactly 2 searches, or like, you know, clock doesn't get there. So I'm okay conceding it is, again, one of the things that like I'll say here. But the reason that I want to cut them is because they're not great cards. Like Maskwood costs 4, doesn't really impact the board, and like people either understand that it's a combo piece and never let you untap with Magda and Maskwood Nexus,
Yeah.
or like you're casting it because it's the last card in your hand, and it's like, okay, this doesn't really impact the board, but like I have nothing better to do. And in those cases, it's like, okay, why am I not just playing a better card?
Right. So the other thing to consider, and because like I think about the deck a lot, right? And I try to look at it from a bunch of different perspectives. And since the release of Lifecraft Engine, the situations where you need to turn your vehicles into an artifact dwarf so that you can like combo off with clock is few and far between. And especially if your list is only on 4 tappers, you realistically, like mathematically, having any of those plus Maskwood Nexus in your hand that end up getting cash for the game are not very high, right? So like the situations where that turns into a win are so few and far between that the card quality is probably worth more not running it, especially when you do have Lifecraft Engine, which does the exact same thing.
Lifecraft itself being an artifact dwarf when you crew it is like
is
just what
insane.
really tips me over the edge here of saying like I've got a better effect for the like Maskwood turning my vehicles into dwarves. And I don't know.
I'm liking
I'm
it.
not confident in it. Is the other thing to kind of say it here. I'm not super confident in a lot of this deck, and the reason that I'm not is because so much of my thoughts on the deck come from play experience, and come from play experience in a very specific setting, because I have not really played this at a large open field tournament outside of just the Top Deck Open last year. So everything else has been kind of this like self-informed Wisconsin meta that just like, I don't know if these decisions are working for me because of the meta or because I play towards lines where they make sense. So I'm not a hater of Barry and Maskwood in a sense. Like I don't have a reason to not like them.
Right.
But I just feel like I could use the slots better. I mean, somebody in the Discord was asking the other day, they're like, you know, backup lines, quote unquote. It's like, you know, Karn Lattice versus Barry Maskwood. It's like comparing the two is apples to oranges, but they are both like 2-card, like tutor. The meaningful part is that you can tutor one or both of them with Magda combos that like lock your opponent out of the game or win you the game, or you know, functionally just end the game, right, to be more open.
Because your opponents can't play with Lattice and play and right. So,
and I've lost a game with a like Lattice null rod setup too. But the reason that I like a lot of these cards is because I can attack the game from a different angle, and I think that the make infinite treasures with like mediocre card quality cards is just already taken by playing more artifact dwarves and playing clock. One of the things that I think I'll note about this tournament is like this meta is really not necessarily like interaction light, but everybody is playing counter spells. Very few people are playing like other Stax pieces just incidentally, and very few people are going to like Praetor's Grasp or extract your clock.
Right. So
Ragavan hitting it's not super likely. Like it's low disruption for the clock plan specifically, so I don't feel bad kind of leaning on it super heavily when our backup plan can be better card quality and not win the game. For those lines where it's like, you know, you have 2 activations, the world's now your oyster. You can put 20 mana's worth of permanents into play if you want, but like, I don't know. Again, I'm not confident on it. All of this is experiential, but I've been playing the Maskwood list since middle of last year, and I've kind of liked it. I've never really felt like I needed them, but I also haven't put them in my deck, so I haven't been thinking about them. So again, it's chicken and egg, and I think anybody who plays kind of either style has a lot of merit. If there was ever a like second Maskwood effect, I would probably put all 4 cards back in, because of the redundancy that you could just like draw one half and tutor for the other more often.
So it's something that I wanted to point out is that because it's so experiential, it's so meta based, and often playing to your comfortable play style is usually the correct call, even if it's not like even if there was an objectively correct build, it may not be it. That is the case, that it playing to your comfort is it'll yield results, and because of that, I find that outside of the broader, more obvious things, speaking super authoritatively about build preference is usually just going to be overstating your claim, which is why I'm glad that you are, giving the caveats that you do and that I normally do, is that, if you're playing a mid-range games, this is how this works well. But if you're playing turbo stacks, something else is going to work. If you're used to playing turbo stacks or a heavy stacks plan, things are going to be different. So I think we've talked about all these cards. I mean, I think RTF is just a really good card.
It's back in the list. I put I put the other 3 cards on this slide back in the deck.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so that's less interesting to talk about. So we'll skip back up to the cards, the couple cards that we missed in the last slide. Yeah. We've talked Mindslaver pretty well. You've taken it out. It didn't do much, right?
It didn't do much. It did exactly what it should. I just think that what it did wasn't good in the times where it could have mattered, and thus it's not worth the include.
Sure.
10 mana is a lot to just like pay the costs to do the thing, and it's a really powerful effect, but like it's really going to shine as a yap tool. Something that you can hold over the opponent who's really far ahead and make sure that they at least respect you. But what I found is like you ended up just like catching a few stray like interactive pieces so that you couldn't do that, and then the player who had that much advantage could just like stop you from doing the thing while also stopping everybody else. So I don't know, it didn't end up mattering, but I thought it was successful while also being bad, and that means that I just immediately cut it. It was like first on the shop.
Right. You can very much have like a gangbusters moment, and then or just like a positive interaction with it and be like, yeah, but like for its cost, or the opportunity cost, it's still not there. Totally get it. Mogg Salvage, I know you're on the mountain package. I don't think we need to talk to death the fact that the last 6 lands in any Magda list that are the untapped red sources, they're pretty much all dog shit and almost never matter, so they could be mountains and probably not change your win percentage. Is that margin worth running Mogg Salvage versus a card like Siege Smash, for example? Because it has a little bit of upside, right, of having another mode.
Yeah, I think being free, 0 mana is pretty great. You can almost always count on one opponent having an island, and you in this deck can. I don't think I've cut a mountain in a long time. I think I've been on the exact same 14 mountains, and I know because they're all different arts. That I always have at least one in play, or like I almost always have at least one in play. And so having just like free shatter is great. Krark players play it because it's a free spell, and I think when it really shines for me is the weird case of like killing a Stax piece or a creature or anything really that just like you need to get rid of. Having a way to do that that's 0 mana is really kind of hard to dismiss. So
Sure.
it's good. I cut it pretty quickly after the tournament as well, just because like I don't know, I'm lower on shatter effects generally because I haven't needed to use one in a while and would rather just like be putting more good permanents in play or kind of like attacking the game a little differently. So it's one that I really like. It's probably the next shatter I'd put in if I wasn't trying to test something specific like Siege Smash, which I think is what I'll do next.
I think, you know, around the winter moon time, I was pretty confident that I still liked Siege Smash over Mogg Salvage, even in a land base that could support it. So, I mean, your mileage is going to vary. There's going to be, you know, I don't have 2 mana. Oh, I don't have an opponent with an island. I don't have a mountain, etc. and so forth. That
I would love if there was just like a 1 red, like shatter effect that was really powerful or good or had some sort of like secondary value.
Yeah.
All of the good ones are 2 mana, or Mogg Salvage's case, sometimes 0 mana, but it doesn't have any flexibility. So it's like you're cutting raw power for versatility.
Am I crazy? Is Passive Flames look at a not Passive Flames? What's the burn? It's a Innistrad card. It's 1 mana.
I'm not.
There's Raise the Effigy.
Raise the Effigy. That's on a shatter, is it?
It's a shatter or it's a buff.
Yeah.
There might also be one that like is a 2 mana that's like a shatter or a loot. There's one from
Find some prisoners.
No, that one is
treasure.
You
or...
like steal. No, you steal somebody's cards.
Right.
The one that I'm thinking of is something else, but then there's the one from Dominaria, 2 mana sorcery speed, shatter, destroy target artifact with defender, or it's like a one-sided fire, like 1 damage pyroclasm, so like 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, which is good. Like there's a lot of flexible shatters out there, and I think we've gone through as a community and we've scrolled through Scryfall and been like, destroy target artifact, legal in a red commander deck, sort by mana value, and just like scrolled down the page and been like, okay, of the like castable ones in the CEDH format, so under 4 mana value, like what are the good ones?
Yeah.
And I think we've come up with a pretty good list of like the best ones. It's like a braid, clearly like far and away the best one, probably. And then once you get past that, it's like hard. There's one that's stapled to a dwarf, which is great, and there's Mogg Salvage and Siege Smash. Like it's hard to find better than those two.
Untimely is a SWAT and a
I love that card.
Shatter. The card.
I love that card so much. Again, 101st card. Wish I could put it in the deck.
You can
maybe
find some room.
Maybe at this point it's the 102nd card, because I also really want to test Stranglehold out again. People are tutoring too much.
I think you probably want to stop them before they get before you get to 4 mana. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's like Stranglehold's great. It's just like you can't stop them.
I'm a fan of 4 mana cards. Moving on to the next one, being Uba Mask.
Let's talk about it because I love this card.
I'm a big fan of Uba Mask in Portal builds of this deck, and now that everybody's on Portal, it's hard to justify Uba Mask without the ability to like Portal, killing somebody's Draneth, like because you got the Magda out first, then they cast the Draneth anyway, then you Portal their Draneth and you reanimate it and you Uba Mask and you lock everybody out of the game. Like, okay, great, you can live in that fantasy world if you want, but I just like the ability to cast Uba Mask. I'm never tutoring for it.
Sure.
It's never a tutor target. There's always something better. It's just an artifact that I will cast for 4 mana. I'm a fan of 4-drops in this deck. There's a reason that I think people are coming around to City of Traders, myself included, which is just that, like, we're a monocolor deck. We should play as many lands that tap for 2 as we can.
Yep.
Ancient Tomb is one of the best cards to draw in the deck because we have all of these kind of like relatively clunky artifact cards that are either combo pieces or just like the closest we get to value engines in mono red. So Uba Mask being another 4-drop, I would probably never play it at 5. Is the reason here of like, if you can ever, you know, land Mox or land Rock or something into Soul Land, turn to an Uba Mask, the game just like slows down so greatly because someone has demonic tutored for Heuristic Study and they've drawn a couple cards and they might try and counter the Uba Mask, but the rest of the table is then incentivized to like stop them from letting it be countered because they then shut down the Heuristic and they just like don't have to worry about paying for it for the rest of the game. There's like a lot of incentive for Uba Mask to play differently at different tables. I would probably cut it if I really needed a slot for something. I don't think it's game breaking, or I don't think it's like so powerful that it really demands a slot, but I think it's good enough at the moment. And I think that especially in slower metagames and more value-based kind of grindy metagames,
we're in
it's
Thrasios country. Yeah, no.
I am in Thrasios country for sure. One of my best friends has the like physical repaint of the Thrasios art that's like, I don't know, multiple, like it's like 3 feet by 4 feet, like this giant oil painting of Thrasios hanging above the table at our one at his place that we like regularly play. So I am well aware that this is Thrasios country, but I also think like just making it so that the Heuristicks and the Mystics are just so bad is powerful. And the best part of this card that I think really surprises some people when they first think about it is it turns off Bowmasters. Like that's just enough of a like small upside for me to kind of tip it over from being like, that's neat, I wish I could find a slot, to I'll put that in my deck and I'll cast it on turn 3 or sometimes turn 2 and be really happy about it.
Yeah, and if you're maintaining a bunch of burn to reduce the non-drawing value engines to nil, that gives you the opportunity to deal with Draenith.
Right.
It depends on how much burn you're on, because like you are very much like play by feel sort of situation, like you said. In Uba Mask, for me, the 4 times that I ever resolved it, 3 of them the opponents tutored for Draenith, and I didn't have a piece of burn. So it's like, it feels real bad when it blows up in your face.
I agree. I have not had that experience. I think that for me, it again is like pretty close to getting cut because I don't often find it being that impactful, but it's kind of a pet card, and it's a pet card that has enough upside for the moment that it's not on the cutting room floor. And it's rapidly approaching that, though. I think as I find more things I want to test and try, I might circle back to it. I think it's never leaving my maybe boards section of my deck box.
I think Uba has
it's good enough for now.
Sorry.
That's all I want to say.
Yeah, fine. I think Uba has that interesting ability, much like Grafdigger's Cage, of kind of hiding its impact at the table, because you don't know what they are. You don't necessarily know throughout the game what they're sandbagging, because now that playline doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you did just nullify a card or 2 in their hand. They're just not going to cast them now, right? And I think that's very much like the Grafdigger's things too. It's just a difference of 3 mana.
Yeah, and that's like, it's a difference in 3 mana, but I think for me it's like, if you're able to get the Uba Mask out faster, it's better. And it's been in the deck since Mana Crypt was legal, and the ability to turn 1 it was much higher. I think, the games where you get it out early are obviously the best because then it does the most stuff, and we're never drawing extra cards, or we're very infrequently drawing extra cards. So I don't know. The reason why I also don't really care about somebody getting Draneth is like, oh, you know, they get to run away with the game, but like, if that is the situation where they get to demonic tutor for a spell and cast it and have it resolve, they might just win the game anyway. Like, imagine it was breach instead. Would the game be meaningfully different?
Yeah,
instead of Draneth
or Thoracle, like,
right? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of like imagined downside with this card, but I also like to say that I think the imagined downside is about as kind of like fantasy world as the imagined upside of portaling somebody else's Draneth and then going and getting Uba Mask. So whatever the future of Uba Mask is, I'm not confident. I'm not particularly like confident that it will stay in the deck, but I like it. It's a pet card. I bought a foil a while back, and I like it when it resolves.
Yep.
It's fun. Nobody sees it coming.
Yep. I like it. On Lattice, just to touch on it a little bit, how many times did you lock this tournament?
0. This tournament, 0. I didn't tutor Lattice at all, and that was probably just because, again, I mulliganed a lot to hands that would either win or lose the game. And I think Lattice locking the game is an interesting like sub game that you get to play with Oof and Null Rod and obviously your own Karn. I don't think you're ever tutoring it into someone else's Karn unless that player is like so far behind. But the reason that I am still on Lattice is because people really liked for a while playing Null Rods and Oofs, especially Dockside meta. And I got the idea in my head of like, okay, well, Karn's just a good card, and having the ability to like resolve Karn and then your first search kind of just like closes the game is really powerful. It's the same kind of effect of you can draw a spell that costs 4 mana or less, and then 1 activation of your commander kind of closes the game. And what really shook my faith in that belief or that kind of like strategy was the time where I did that with somebody else's Null Rod instead of my Karn. So the whole game was locked down, which is like the secondary mode of Lattice in the deck of like you're able to sometimes get ahead on board of somebody else's Collector Roof, Null Rod, etc. And if you're able to manipulate the game state in a certain way, you don't even have to resolve Karn to make one Magda search for Lattice just end the game on the spot. But what I found is like you oftentimes needed to set up Portal into Lattice lock with somebody else's Null Rod in play to actually close the game, because I lost a game where I Lattice locked everybody out. There was a Null Rod and I tutored Lattice, and then I just didn't have enough Dwarves, and they attacked me to death before I could and I couldn't profitably block the like total number of creatures that my opponents had. So I think to some degree it's like, again, this is a card that I am sold on based on experience, but upon reflection, like I understand it is one of the weaker cards in the deck, and my conceit is I will play this bad card because I think I play towards it, and I like playing towards those lines more than some of the other like bad cards we can choose to play.
All right. Thanks for that explanation.
Let's move to the tournament.
Oh, no, we have one more card I want to talk about.
Which one is that?
Stoke the Flames. Have you seen it? Have you been casting it for 1 mana? Has it made you 3 treasures? Like all the good stuff.
They just removed it. That's important.
What was the question?
How good has Stoke the Flames been for you?
Oh, how good is it? Okay. I think it's excellent. I think killing Crown, great. Killing Archelaus with it once was pretty sick. Killing 4 toughness creatures is not strictly necessary. I think the breakpoint in this format is often 3, but the ability to have another instant speed tapper for summoning sick dwarves is a powerful effect. There are very few red convoke spells that are low enough like mana value to be super playable because red gets to go so wide in other constructed formats with stuff like Kuldotha Rebirth and whatever the new one is, Gleeful Demolition. Um, so they have to be really careful with printing red convoke spells, and this is really like the only one that I think is good enough based on what I've looked at. I wish there was like a red protection spell that had convoke, kind of like a color shifted version of ephemeral shields. But Stoke the Flames is good. If you're looking for an extra removal spell and you're looking for an extra instant speed tap effect, I think it is, you know, the only card that you can play in that spot. And when my meta is super creature heavy, and specifically super creature heavy in a way where I want to be able to play at instant speed, I think that's when I would put it in the deck. I have cut it, you know, after the tournament. I didn't see it all day when I was playing, and I can't really give you a judgment on like how good it is other than saying like there are games where it single-handedly wins because it is able to make 2 treasures and kill an oppo for 2 mana.
Yep.
Or there are games where like it's stuck in your hand after you've been Psych Rifted and it's the worst card in the deck, right? Like it's gonna draw each opponent a card, it's gonna cost 4 mana, and it's gonna kill like a meaningless dork. So I don't know. Having direct damage spells in this format that go face is also a little bit of a boon. I've occasionally like showed an opponent who I think has maybe their own direct damage spell, or showed an opponent who is like thinking on a counter spell on a Necro or something like that. Like, you know, flash them a Stoke the Flames, or just like kind of been able to politic a little with it. I think that any direct damage spell that can go face has that small upside. So my thesis on Stoke the Flames is that like I will be very quick to put it back in the deck.
Okay. Thanks for that. Let's get on to rounds now that we're 2 hours into this.
Yeah.
So, this is round 1. Turn order is you on Magda, then Yuriko, then Crick, then Glarb. Cards of the game are Ancient Tomb and Karn the Great Creator. Shoot.
So for anybody listening, if you want, I wrote up a kind of like live blog of this. The short description of this game is that I set the tone on turn 1 by going turn 1 Artifact Dwarf and saying like to the table kind of immediately, just like, I'm gonna play on curve this game, or like not really on curve, but like I'm not playing a bunch of rocks. I'm not the player who's going fast. Like I'm in seat 1. Let's chill. You know, it's noon. We're ready to start gaming. And I had mulliganed for some mana and kept a hand with an Ancient Tomb in it that I thought was great. Oh, look, turn 3 Karn. This is pretty sick. And I think I literally just like cast my hand kind of like in the order that I had mana for it. And what made the game meaningful to me was that Crick went turn 1 Mana Vault, and the Yuriko went turn 1 land Mox Amber, no 1-drop. And by the time it came back to my turn, I thought, okay, I'm playing against 2 blue players into a Crick. They're going to have counter spells, and I'm going to have permanents in play. What's the best way that I can leverage this board state to have that be an advantage for me? And the answer was to immediately kind of like set the table in a kind of like relaxed state where they think the game's going to continue for a while and we're just going to play like value pieces, because I have this universal automaton just like chilling on board. And so I go turn 2 Ancient Tomb, and then I say to the Crick player as I cast Plundering Barbarian, I say the words, all right, Evan, because he's one of my playgroup friends, I'm going to plunder your vault. And like just make it a joke, right? Like incentivize people to interact because I'm telling them it's fun to do so. And then the very next turn, you know, Yuriko passes, you know, no play, misses their land drop. Their Mox Amber's like not turned on. They have no 1-drop. They can't cast their commander even. Like their game, they just kept a bad hand. And I think that's really what like made this game so easy, is that Yuriko didn't really do anything. But I was able to... Right. And I was able to kind of like incept into their brain, I think, a little bit, like, we should interact with Crick. We should proactively interact with Crick. And I was right, because the Crick player untaps and goes, dang, wish I had my mana vault, swamp, dark ritual, Crick. It's like, oh, you would have had a lot. You would have maybe just won the game if we hadn't done that. So the Yuriko player decides to, and they had kind of bled me the subtlety in their hand. And so I knew by the time that the Crick went to cast his commander, that they were just itching to use that subtlety. They hadn't cast a spell besides that Mox Amber this game. They wanted to feel like they were also contributing. I'd made it fun for them to like interact as a way of playing the game. And so they subtlety the Crick, and the Crick is kind of just out of the game. Like they're sitting on 2 swamps and nothing to do with it.
Right. And a 6 mana Crick. Yeah.
Right. And apparently they had a Bowmaster in hand, but I don't think it ended up mattering at any point, because at one, or like they tapped out of casting it 1 turn or something like that. But I saw both the Crick and the Glarb player this game, like either they both had Bowmasters. The Glarb discarded it to something for value later in the game and like didn't cast it, where it probably would have slowed me down a turn. But I ended up going to my turn 3, casting Karn just a turn early. It turned off a mana vault that was untapped, and another like rock from the Karn, or from the Glarb player, and like really slowed them down, so they couldn't just like win out of nowhere. And my turn 4 was where I think I just like locked up the game because my draw steps had been God Pharaohs and Jeska's Will and Metallic Mimic, and then like on the last turn, or like maybe after it stopped mattering, I drew Roaming Throne. So it's like I was drawing really hot this game, being able to kind of just like curve out with the lands I kept in my 6 cards, and having the other cards in my hand have text. Like J-Will's great, everybody knows that, but being able to play a game of like interaction that also just put pieces of cardboard in play from seat 1 set a good tone for the day. And I think I got a little lucky that Yuriko kept a bad hand, and Glarb kept a hand that like maybe needed the mana vault and the Mox or whatever other rock they had in play like to do anything. But they also kind of got screwed on colors, because they drew like an Ancient Tomb in a Sultai deck, so they stumbled into casting their commander on turn 2 off the Mox Diamond, and then like didn't have colored mana other than like 1 or 2 sources for the rest of the game after I Windmill Slammed the Karn on turn 3. Like turning them off of the Mox Diamond was a big deal, and I think I'm solidly in the camp of like I will always play Karn, and because I will always or like almost always play Karn, I'm really likely to keep Lattice in the deck for that matter as well. Going back a topic a little bit, like Karn was a card of the game here, but it was really Ancient Tomb letting Karn come out a turn early, and Ancient Tomb letting me play an interactive dwarf on turn 2 after Crick did something scary, and incentivize the table to like view me as the dorky creature combo deck instead of the like explosive win the game on turn 3 deck, because it did take me until turn 5 to win the game, but I had put relevant Magic cards on the table in the meantime, and that always feels good. This was a pretty quick game, and I ended up just like yapping.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir
for a while
like,
afterwards.
The value of like just Tomb and City of Traders and cards like that just let you skip a turn. You just get to play on curve a little bit faster, and it's just good. Feels good.
City of Traders on like turn 3 or turn 4 is like the best thing that nothing feels better to me. Like, I no longer fear that Magda's going to die or anything like that. It's just like, okay, well, like whatever happens. I have the mana to deal with whatever.
Right.
And it came up the other day. The hidden mode, we aren't even. City of Traders won't come up, but we're talking about Soul Lands because it was one of my cards of the game. City of Traders, when I was testing it, Saturday? No, this past Friday night. I used it to aggressively hold up a Talon Gates, because in his typical fashion, my dear friend Sam Black went, pre-game action, I'm going to show the Magda player a card, and it was Gutshot. And I was like, oh god. So I didn't play Magda. I showed him the I had like other cards in my hand that did things, so I just didn't cast Magda until I had the kind of like rest of the game like talking, and had kind of incentivized Sam to like not gut shot my Magda. And what I ended up doing was holding up Talon Gates with the City of Traders that I had in play. So City of Traders being able to like not only power out your permanents that cost a little bit of extra mana, but like turn on some of the clunkier interaction in the deck that's like that incidental type stuff. So being able to, you know, for example, cast a Return the Favor with both modes. Like that has 2 colorless mana. Soul lands are great at those too. So I'm a fan of City of Traders, and it hasn't burned me yet. I did end up accidentally sacking my city when I like channeled, quote unquote, or like put the Talon Gates into play, which was wrong. And I know that now in hindsight.
That does not sack your
exactly. It doesn't trigger the city, but like in the moment, I was just like kind of tilted because I ended up having to respond to a different removal spell with the Talon Gates, and then the gut shot hit the Magda anyway, and I was like, come on, my sub game. But whatever, not relevant for this round, but
Sure.
other than to say Soul Land's good. We're all kind of trying City of Traders. I'm keeping up with the Magdanomicon change list, and I agree it's good to make 2 mana with 1 land.
Yep, I was on Crystal Vein a year and a half ago. Not nearly as good.
Yeah. Should we play the one from what is it, Dwarven Ruins? The like depletion land that taps for red and the colorless?
Sandstone Pillars, I think, is the one you're talking about.
Oh yeah, that one sucks.
Yeah, it does. I mean, Sandstone Pillars is not nearly as bad as Dwarven Ruins. That's true. That's much worse because it's a tapped land that also cracks itself for 2. All right, let's moving on to 2. Another win. We have a turn order is Vile Thras, then Kinnan, then Glarb, then Andrew on Magda. Cards of the games are Gemstone Caverns and Twin Shot Sniper.
Yeah. So I keep this hand only because it has Gemstone in it. The rest of my opener is Mountain Clowncar, Twin Shot, Rending Volley, Pyroblast, Abrade.
Jesus.
So my game plan is really like Magda or bust here. So I have a ton of removal. I end up pitching the Abrade to the Gemstone. I think it might have been... it was a tough choice in the moment, but I'm glad I made it. And I go turn 0, you know, before I even get to play, like interact with 2 players as premier effects, right? Like, or that's not how that works. I go turn 0, I Gemstone, I make a red off Gemstone to Pyroblast a fish, right? Like the Vile Thras player on turn 1 plays a Mystic Remora, and I just say, no thank you. I'm not playing that game. Yep. I know that either the Kinnan or the Glarb has kept a handful of mana rocks and is just going to deploy them and say, okay, other guy, you must have free counter magic. And then we're going to lose to Vile Thras. And the game's going to be over. And so I'm like, I will 1-for-1 that Mystic Remora all day.
And it's usually their game plan, right?
Right. And I end up going to my turn. I think the Kinnan player just like plays Kinnan. The Glarb player plays Soul Ring Thought Vessel. And... the theme of the Glarb player's game is that they're once again really stuck on colors. That's 2 rounds in a row of the Glarb deck just like not making enough pips to cast their commander or like any reasonable spell afterwards. Okay. So I'm able to cast Magda, cast Clowncar, and hold up a quote unquote a mana. It's a treasure, but it's a mana. And when the Kinnan player starts looking scary on their turn 2, they like cast a Springleaf Drum, I think. They like, yeah, they cast something else and then they cast a Springleaf Drum. And I'm like, that's a bit much for me. And I just like Rending Volley the Kinnan. I think they made a misplay. They said they were supposed to like float all of their mana and cord for a 1-drop in response or something. Which they didn't do. And they told me after the game that like it probably was right to do, but whatever the case, they just like let the Kinnan die, and I'm able to go to my turn. Glarb's kind of scary. They play out a Wishclaw Talisman, and I don't remember if I was able to put like my draws in here. Yeah, I didn't put what I drew. But the meaningful part of this game that I want to like highlight to some degree is that I was able to have a lot of really premium interaction in the deck, and slow the game down so that the Magda clown car like value engine of generating treasures was able to eventually do something. I had drawn an artifact dwarf, maybe metallic mimic, maybe not. I saw a lot of metallic mimic at this tournament. I got tired of it, but I also bought a foil copy halfway through because the shop had the secret lair
Very good.
foil now instead of the non-foil that I bought from them like 2 years ago.
Okay.
But my point is, I saw a lot of metallic mimic, and I had one in play, and the game state had kind of evolved where on the Glarb's turn, before my turn 3, turn 4, or something like that, because we had slowed down the game, like the Glarb had just tutored for Oppo and was kind of like holding up the Oppo, waiting for the Kinnan to tutor with the Wish Claw that they had been given. You know, the classic play of like the first Wish Claw activation gets Oppo, so that whoever you pass it to, you then steal whatever, like you also get to tutor their deck or whatever.
Yep.
But there was this weird moment in the game that kind of like took everybody's attention off of really anything else, where the Viletrass player went for not Thassa's Oracle, ETB on the stack, hold priority, Tainted Pact. They went for Tainted Pact, flip my deck over, then cast Thassa's Oracle.
Wow.
And we're like, counterspell the Thassa's Oracle? And they're like, counter back. Somebody had the second like piece of interaction, and we watched them like scoop the game because they just like cast the spells in the bad order, and it seemed intentional. And the rest of us at the table at that time kind of just like looked at each other. But eventually the Kinnan player and the Glarb player reach a deal where the Kinnan player reads that the Glarb player had tutored Oppo because it's really good into Magda.
Right.
And they are afraid of activating the Wish Claw on their turn. So they read that they tutored Oppo, that the Glarb tutored Oppo, and they kind of ask, like, what can I tutor for? And the Glarb's like, get a removal spell. And the Kinnan's like, yeah, but like that doesn't really interact with you. I'm just gonna get a counter spell. And the Glarb player goes, okay, fine, give it back to me. I'll just like tutor a value engine and we'll like set Magda back a couple turns and like see how the game progresses. But the Oppo comes down in the Kinnan's end step after they tutor a counterspell. The Glarb player tutors Wandering Archaic. Somehow that was like their best choice of like a value engine to play that wouldn't like get bit by the Kinnan just counterspelling it. Because I think like if they just tutor Ristic or something, like one player's already dead, the Kinnan might just counter it, but it's also not good. So they get Wandering Archaic, and I kind of like look at them sideways a little bit, or like look at them weird, like why are you doing that? But that's because I'm staring at the Twin Shot Sniper. That means that their Wandering Archaic is blank, and the Kinnan's counterspell doesn't interact with it, so I'm able to just Twin Shot Sniper the Oppo and instep, untap, and I think I needed to top deck at that point exactly one treasure. I ended up ripping a treasure vault, so I could fill some, like I had a mana vault sitting in play untapped because I didn't have anything to spend mana on. My hand was a bunch of red pips and removal spells. So I just like spend 4 mana into the treasure vault, make the last 2 treasures I need, get Roaming Throne, go to combat, make more treasures, win the game on the spot. It's like, it's not hard to win in those positions when the Kinnan is like holding up a counter spell and I just don't have to cast a spell. Or, maybe they get Force of Negation and they like try and rebuild their board and they hold up like a free piece of interaction that only hits non-creatures, and it's like, okay, well I just cast a dwarf and I tap the dwarf to my clown car and we go from there. But this game was really a case of showing off like removal spells good, and removal spells that are weird and powerful and unique even better.
Yep. Twin Shot is the red Otawara.
Twin Shot's good.
Good card. All right. Let's move on to game 3. We have Magda in seat 1. That's a bit of a theme. We have Volo, Agent of the Iron Throne. I'm going to be honest, I forget what both of those cards do. And then Thras, Livio. I don't know what Livio does either. And then Timnacrom.
Okay. So to explain both of the 2 decks, because I ended up seeing the Volo agent deck in top 16, as well as the Timna Crown from this round in top 16. Plus, I've seen the Livio piles running around this area before.
Sure.
But to explain those decks a little bit for anybody who's not familiar, the Agent of the Iron Throne card is essentially a like infinite combo win condition in the zone. There are ways to make like infinite artifacts in the deck.
It's Disciple of the Vault or Blood Artist. Take your pick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's ways to like loop stuff in the deck, and you get to have an outlet for it that way. And Volo is this weird card that when it enters, you make a legendary token artifact that notes each creature type you cast, and for each creature type you have cast that is noted, you can then like pay 2 mana and draw a card for each creature type. So it's a draw outlet on a creature in the zone. So it's like you get to play this weird like Dimir value engine commander that is also a Dimir infinite outlet, and it's a unique space to play in. I think it's probably bad, but it's really interesting.
Sure.
And then Livio is just an infinite mana outlet that turns infinite mana into infinite flickers of a creature. So you're playing the like Thras infinite mana, you know, combos that you can get in white.
Sure.
With stuff like Swift Reconfig, Devoted Druid, and you're just looking for ways to turn infinite mana into flickers. Or, you know, maybe you have a creature, a Cloud of Fairies that makes a ton of mana. So you can like, you know, tap your Gaia's Cradle for 11, and then one of your commanders is your outlet to flicker your other value creature at the same time. It's like the deck is just another Thras value pile, and then T&K is T&K.
Sure. All right, and cards of the game are Dwarven Grunt, Magda, Brazen Outlaw. So just dwarfs.
Yeah, this game was tough. I've kind of prefixed this a little bit in my previous comments on like table talk and politicking. This game was really a class in how to do so. It's on stream if you want to watch it, and it unfortunately ends with one of the worst punts I've ever made in a game of Commander. But to start with, I kept a 5-card hand, never a good sign. And I mulled because, like, again, I spent this game mulling a bunch to fast mana and just not finding it. But this hand had a Mox Opal in it and a 1-drop and a PFB. I'm like, those are good cards. I'll eventually cast some spells that'll matter. Yeah. And I'm in seat 1, so I have a little bit of like a cushion in terms of like mulling to 5 and having a slower hand.
Yep.
But I think this game was really T&K's to lose from the start. They kept a hand that was Gemstone into turn 1 double Esper Sentinel, because they went Esper Sentinel Mockingbird.
Jesus.
And just like copied their Esper Sentinel and just like drew some cards for the whole game. And they were able to kind of talk the table into bouncing my PFB, which didn't end up really mattering. I was able to redeploy it, and I think it only really lost me like the 1 treasure that the PFB itself would have made when connecting, which I don't think mattered, because I had something like 4 or no, I had enough to activate when the game ended, but I didn't have enough to double activate, and it wasn't like I was 1 shy of a double activation either, right? Like I was in that like weird 6-7 zone, I think. But the rest of the game that I want to talk about is before I untap with probably one of the easier wins, because I've got a PFB, Magda, and a Dwarven Grunt in play, like to just attack and go to combat and make enough treasures to double activate, and you can pretty trivially win from there.
Yep.
But the turn before I do that, the T&K player kind of begrudgingly like looks at my Magda and like tells me, you know, yeah, you can activate, and like kind of I have to play around this, and kind of like hems and haws a little bit. And this player has kind of been table talking the whole game and has been the one who talked one of the other players into bouncing my PFB. And I hadn't really clocked that they were kind of politicking really heavily yet. But in hindsight, they had this one like interaction where they were like, yeah, this is CEDH, we're all playing bad cards, and played that kind of like politics sub game too, of being like, all of our decks are bad, I'm not gonna win. And on that turn, they like cast a rock and cast a Teferi, the 3-mana Teferi,
Yep.
and the rest of the table just kind of like passes on it, and I'm like, oh, that's
Wild.
not good.
That's
in my
wild.
head. But I pick it up and I read it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can just activate Magda. We're good. If something scary happens, like Teferi doesn't shut off Magda, I can find a piece that stops whatever
Portal
they're doing.
Kills kitten, whatever.
Right, and that was my thought process. They cast a gamble, they discard a Cabal ritual, and I'm like, okay, I'm a little afraid now. And they sit and they think for a second again, and they like cast another rock, I think, and they're like clearly repping to the whole table that like they're probably about to pass. And they're just like thinking what to Teferi bounce. They look around the table and they go, I guess I'll bounce Magda. And I go, uh-huh. And they immediately, like the other two players kind of like just go, yeah, that's fine, and they immediately go, okay, breach win. I'm like, oh, I forgot to activate Magda. I just totally spaced, because they did that kind of like physical tell, like kind of selling me and hooking me on the understanding that I could respond to Teferi until the exact moment that they didn't. And then right before they activated the Teferi ability to bounce Magda, they're just like, yeah, they're looking around the table, they're like surveying, they're not acting like they're about to win. And I talked to them after it, and they just admitted it. They're like, yeah, I play this game like it's poker. I play this game trying to like bait people into
Plays, yeah.
like calling my fake bluff, that kind of thing. And I'm like, and he told me after the fact, he's like, yeah, I'm a salesman for my job. Like I like this kind of thing. And I kind of at the time, this was post top 4 or like post top 16, like after I had made a deep run and beaten him again in the top 16. And I complimented him on that, and I was like, you taught me something about how to table talk in politic and communicate to someone that the onboard trick that they have already kind of like figured out a way to play around is not worth considering, and then making it matter in a way that like clearly won them the game on the spot.
Yeah.
If you go watch the stream, you can watch me sit there and kind of absorb this like immediately and viscerally game losing punt for like 5 to 10 minutes after the other players get up from the table. I'm just like still sitting there kind of like staring at my board state, or I think I packed up my deck and I was just like staring at the playmat like, okay, I got worked. I got absolutely yapped on a league that I am not willing to play at, or like I'm not able to play at. And so as much as I gave the like card of the game or something like that to some things, it's like it didn't end up mattering because of stuff outside of the text printed on the Magic cards. Right. It was all about the people and the interpersonal side of this game. And I feel like I'm going to take some of the things I learned into my own playstyle and like try and kind of sell people with body language, even just a little bit harder, because I feel like we're all tournament grinders in that space. Like we should be better at clocking that kind of thing, but we're also a bunch of like nerds who are playing a strategy card game, and I mean that in the most complimentary way. Like it's a social format. Everybody says that, and I just got a visceral experience of it this time.
Oh man, it's crazy because I've never seen anyone activate, like, if they're okay, I can't win this turn, I'll try next turn, and they go down tick. No, that doesn't make a lick of sense, right? But they got you because it's
I don't think they ever like said the words like I'm not going to win this turn. They just kind of like sold me with how they held their cards. I think most of the turn they had their hand face down. Like they cast a rock, they put their hand face down on the table, they looked, they cast the Teferi and like thought about what they were going to bounce, put their hand down again, gambled, put their hand face down, and I don't even think they picked it up after the gamble resolved from when they like then went to downtick the Teferi. So I wasn't imagining that they were like looking forward to casting another spell. They were like gambling for the combo piece for next turn or something.
So,
And because they had cast all of that ahead of time, it's like they were repping me 2 mana. Great.
but that's all they needed.
What do I need to be scared of that costs
Right.
2 mana? I can just get GPS. And then they bounce my Magda instead of my PFB, and I'm like, oh, well, now I can't get GPS because I freaking forgot.
All right. So I've talked about this a couple other places, but I wanted to mention it here because a couple of people have told me it's worked for them, and I wanted to share the I love the. I'm gonna put my hand down and put the hand count die on top of it. That's great. Love doing that, especially when my grip is full of 4 burn spells. Right, that's great. But something I did at Play-Doh-Win that other people have said has worked for them is I have the gold saber-tooth tokens, and one of them is a gold one. It doesn't matter what it is, just have a distinct 6th token or 11th token, whatever it needs to be, right? And just say, hey, this is my winning token. Only one I got of it. If you don't see it on the table, I'm not winning. Don't go crazy. And you can psychologically prime people from turn 0 of, oh, okay, this person's playing heads up magic, and until they show you number 6, you're good. And that won me my 4th game at Play-Doh-Win, or my 4th round. Just like I had my player to my left say, but he's not showing the gold one. He's not going to win. And to be fair, I hadn't. I wasn't. I had a trick in my hand. But it's just whatever you can do to psychologically prime people that you are not a threat, even if you are. Take advantage of that shit.
Yeah, I might take advantage of it in the way that you said it there, right? Of, like, not necessarily lying about like what's face up, but having the like mental kind of trigger for people. I think if you start doing it and then you're consistent with it,
Yeah,
people will eventually catch on. But in these open tournaments, like, you can just kind of, I don't know, not necessarily like lie to people about that kind of thing, but you can use the advantage of hidden information to the fullest in that extent, where it's like, I'm not showing you that I'm gonna win, but I know in my head that I am. And that like little play of getting people to show you what's in their hand is super powerful.
Right.
I probably could have leveraged the rest of the table a lot better this game. I think it came down to or in my hindsight, it feels a lot like a 1v1 of like me and the TNK player kind of like
playing your own
politicking
game
against each other.
Yeah.
Because of like the way that the other 2 players kept some like speculative hands that like maybe didn't pan out or whatever. Like, I don't know what their exact game plan was, but I talked a lot about me and the other player, like one other player, but that's just because the other 2 didn't do a lot in the game, right? Like maybe they were about to win on their turn if they got to it or something, but like they just didn't even do very much.
That's a lot of games.
It's kind of funny though, like that body language and tone of voice and stuff makes that much of a difference that they can just go, yeah, you know, down tick to fairy, target Magda, and you're just like, yeah, cool. And then you're like, wait.
Right.
Yeah, and what I ended up realizing too was like this was also me playing hasty, right? Like I am showing them more than 5 treasures in play, which means that if I get to the end step with my Magda in play, I get Roaming Throne and I win. And it's like pretty straightforward from there. And I was already thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about how to make it through the Teferi's turn. I had already turned my brain off. I was like, not Teferi, the TNK's turn. Like, as soon as I saw Talisman Teferi, I was like, okay, 3 mana left. They're probably not winning. Like, I can just like plan out what I'm gonna get in my in their end step, and that's on me, right? Like, I just completely dropped the ball in terms of reading that they could potentially still win the game.
Yep.
All right, in hindsight, I probably. In hindsight, I probably just get GPS and then we continue playing the game and I don't win on the spot, but we're continuing to play the game, which is better than what ended up happening.
Yep, especially if your goal is to not draw. All right, so let's move on to 4. So we got Rogthras, Brea, love to see her, you on Magda, and then TNK, card of the game being Lifecraft Engine. Sell me on the best card in the deck.
It is not the best card in the deck. Sure. That is firmly Roaming Throne.
Yes, obviously.
But The this hand was an interesting one because it was the only time all day that I saw the Cavern Horde dragon after mulling once. I think this was probably my second 7. But what I ended up keeping the hand on was the turn 1 Mana Vault Lifecraft engine. And the one part of selling you on Lifecraft engine is that it won me this game single-handedly. Sure. And I misplayed it. But also it confused somebody because the Rogsai mulled to 3 and went turn 1 fish. Like Mystic Remora, I'm just hoping to get back into this game. And everybody at the table's like, great, we just don't need to feed the fish. Like, that's a turn 1 Rog. I think it's supposed to be Rogsai. Maybe I mistyped.
It's possible I messed it up. Let me check real quick.
Yeah, it is Rogsai instead of Rogdrast, but it doesn't really matter. They played the same amount of cards this game. I think that they turn 1 fished and they kept it for like 2 turns. But what ended up mattering in the meantime was the Breya pretty transparently, with a fish in play, on turn 2 after some way of setting up, tutored turn 2 or turn 3, tutored a Bowmasters, and Bowmastered Magda, and I was like, oh shucks, and stuck Magda in the command zone, and only like 2 turns later realized, oh, Lifecraft was naming Dwarf. Like, Magda was a 3/2 and wouldn't have died. Like, maybe the fish trigger, like, or 2 fish triggers next turn, like, kills her, but like, that's a meaningful difference in terms of the way the game plays out. But I misplayed it, and whatever. So the fish was dead. I ended up casting a Damping Sphere, a Mox Opal, and the Liquimetal Torque I had in my hand. Timnathras resolved Survival, and then before they untapped, tutored their own Bowmasters. And the Rogsai player followed their Mystic Remora up with Soul Ring Rhystic Study, I think. Like, they tutored either one or the other, and like just kind of tried to keep drawing cards to get back in the game as we attacked their life total as much as we could. Mm-hmm. But the Breya stuck a Smothering Tithe, which incentivized me to start attacking them with Cavern Horde Dragon, because they were like 1 artifact up on the Rogsai player, who just had a couple of rocks sitting around. And I cast the dragon turn 4, turned it sideways, got 2 treasures. Like, that's why I cut the card, was like, it did the thing, right? Like, my
even in that situation,
Rogsai opponent, I think, had like 3 or 4 like artifacts in play, or maybe the Breya player had like 3 or 4 artifacts in play, and I was able to cast it for 4 or 5 mana, but it just wasn't immediately impressive. Even though it was kind of key for the rest of the way the game played out. The second attack, like, we go around another turn of people kind of setting up. I think the Timnathras really needed to be survivaling like a lot more proactively. They probably only had 1 or 2 creature cards in hand. And reading that, I saw I was approaching getting to 5 treasures without needing to activate to like shut down the game or, stop somebody from winning. And did a really weird play. I tried to attack the Rogsai because the Breya had flashed me a Chain of Vapor when I threatened to attack them again with the dragon. They had more treasures, so I was like board state incentivized to attack them. And they show me the chain. I go, okay, Rogsai, sorry, I have to attack you. The Rogsai next turn, like tutors or does something and like then says, all right, I'm gonna show you my removal spell, and shows me a Slaughter Pact, which they can pay for on their turn, but like, you know, is still something they don't want to cast. So I attack them with it, or I attack the Brea. Yeah, I attack the Brea on my turn 5. And the Brea player, like, wanting to hold up chain for some reason, like, blocks, or yeah, goes to blocks with both Thopters, sacks the Brea and a rock to the Brea ability to shrink the dragon and trade with the Thopters. And I trample over for 0 damage, so I don't even get it like a dragon trigger, which is rough, but whatever. They had an efficient answer that cost them a bunch of resources and set them back a while. Great. And what I end up doing in that spot is I look at the board state, and I look and I see, like, okay, survival is a 1-card win con. There is a green floating. There is a Smothering Tithe in play that will probably generate 2 treasures. Brea has 2 treasures, or 1 treasure face up and a land, and I've seen a Chain of Vapor. So what I need to do is like incentivize them to use the Chain of Vapor so that I can try and win with a Magda activation for clock to target Lifecraft and win the game that way, because I've got the Magda, I've got the Artifact Dwarf, but it's gonna get interrupted unless I make a bunch of like random pieces of cardboard to go off on top of whatever interaction. And so I kind of, second main phase, cast a Trinisphere and pass. And usually that's kind of like the equivalent of defense grid passing. Like, you're in the late game, people are probably holding up free mana, and you're passing the turn after casting Trinisphere. But I knew that the Brea would make at least 1 more treasure, and cracking those treasures would also turn off the Mox Opal they had sitting there and make their next turn a lot worse. Like, the Smythe would eventually build them back up to Metalcraft. It wasn't a big deal. But I was able to kind of like incentivize the TNT to discard the Bowmasters that they had in hand, which they did, to go get Devoted Druid, to discard the Druid to get Brewmaster to cast Brewmaster. And then, you know, the Brea player knows the right time to interact. They make enough treasures off of the Rhystic Study from the Rogsai drawing a card to bounce the Hazels with the target on the stack. So the TNT player gets blown out, the Breas use their removal spell, life is good. Rogsai probably can't win through a 3-ball, we're chilling. Everybody goes pass, and then in the Rogsai's end step, I had a volatile fault in play for an extra treasure, and I saw that I could target a land on the Brea's side to take them off of 3 mana, because the Rogsai had paid for their draw, and they didn't have a treasure from Smothering Tithe to turn Metalcraft back on yet on their Opal. So if I was able to take them off 3 mana, they probably would just pass the turn, because there's a 3-ball in play, they can't cast anything.
Sure.
And that is exactly what ended up happening. They passed to me. That I think, like, I don't pay for a Rhystic, and they get the 3rd treasure to be able to have a removal spell on my turn through the Trinisphere, but I did have enough cardboard to play on top of 1 removal spell, and was able to just, like, combo off above them. And there was still a Bowmaster sitting in play, and this was the one time where I kind of, like, explained away a random, like, hate piece with Spine, where I'm just, like, in the middle of the combo, like, before I start drawing my deck, I'll just Spine the Bowmaster, like, whatever. I just made it, like, not a big deal, because I had Spine in the list. So it's like, I'm a fan of it for that reason, as well as killing your own Grafdigger's Cage. This was a good game. I thought I was able to play with Lifecraft Engine really well, and kind of going back to what you asked of, like, sell me on Lifecraft Engine. I misplayed it, and it was still the best card of the game, because it lets you tap Magda immediately, right? Like, it gives Magda the 1 power to be able to crew the engine itself. And then if you turn 1 engine and then you turn 2 Magda, which is exactly what I did, you get to go tap Magda, make a treasure, go to combat, attack with engine, make a second treasure, and swing and hit for 4. Like, that's a pretty good rate for just like a card in your deck. It's also an artifact dwarf for the combo. Like, card's great. It does everything you want. It's a vehicle and an artifact dwarf. You really don't need too much more explanation to know why it's like just cracked in half.
Oh, me asking you to sell me on it was completely facetious. But I'm glad
Yeah,
you're doing a good job.
yeah.
But I'll say what won you that game wasn't Lifecraft Engine. What won you that game was the players being smart enough to not blow interaction too early, and talk you out of it by showing it to you, and then you bullying the ever loving shit out of them quietly to force them to sandbag and force them to use it on someone in a very safe for you kind of way. That's what won you that game.
Yeah. I think it was not quite the safest thing ever with all the information I had. What's weird is I think the Timnath Ras had enough mana to pay for an extra Aristic trigger, which would have not given the Brea the 3rd treasure to cast the chain through the 3-ball on the Hazels. And what ended up being weird about it was the Brea player after the game was like, oh, I just had an SSG. Like, it wasn't a big deal. I had an extra mana. I could have chained even if you had paid for the Ristic trigger, because everybody was being really responsible about paying for the tithe when the Brea has like a full grip and a Mox Opal in play.
Right.
Like, it's pretty clear we want to keep them off of as many treasures as we can. So we were all trying to pay for our draws. And it could have been sketchy. Like, say I play the 3-ball and then I pass, and the Brea's like, yeah, I have this chain that I showed you, but everybody paid for their draws, and like, we just lose. So I don't know. It's a weird one for sure. And I like the ability with like any of the deck's like toolboxy cards to interact, but this game, like, I don't know, the style that I can play when I get these hands that have even just like 1 or 2 pieces of fast mana is that the deck plays so much more like a combo deck, and this game really showed it, where I was able to kind of like play a combo piece really early and then just kind of sit back on my hand full of, like, I guess, Stax pieces, but Stax pieces that didn't really like stop the game and were instead more along the lines of like tactically deployed kind of like targeted pieces where I was playing them with purpose.
Right.
And I liked that element of the deck a lot, and I think this game was a great showcase of, if you want to, you can kind of read information, or you can play around information that you have.
Yep. Show knows very well the soul read.
Right.
So let's move on to round 5.
Yeah.
All right, we got a Sisay in first, Timna Crom, then a Artifact Storm Joyra, and then you in 4th seat. And the card of the game is a red Elemental Blast.
Yeah. This game is the most boring CEDH game you'll ever play. I think Sisay, myself, and Joyra all, like, play a turn 1 dork or, like, advantage piece or combo piece or something, and the TNK plays, like, some Esper Sentinel or draw effect. I'm, like, looking at my notes here on the side, too. Yeah, I mulled to 6. I had Ragavan, Train Heist, Red Blast, 3 lands, including a Mountain, a Treasure Vault, and a Shinka. Oh yeah, the TNK plays Gemstone into turn 1 Soul Ring. Sisay plays Land Pass first, and tries to E-tutor in my end step. The TNK player oppos the E-tutor and gets a Lotus Petal, and the whole table is just like, oh, we're super dead. The TNK player goes like land, other free mana, Naws, or like land, Mana Vault, Float a Colorless, Gnaws, like it, just this gross hand of being able to turn 1 Soul Ring Oppo into turn 2 Mana Vault Gnaws is just sickening. And, you know, their Gnaws flips well. The deck's kind of built to do that, right? They probably could have sad Gnawsed into losing the game on the spot, but they didn't. They flipped over enough free mana to just Oracle Consult. And if they wanted to, they flipped over enough cards to just, like, breach Brain Freeze instead. Like, they had the world in their hands.
And
with a Dispel for the only piece of free interaction. The Joyra had a Force of Will, but Force of Will doesn't work when they Gnaws into a Dispel. Like, they have everything in that spot, and it doesn't matter.
Why didn't she Gnaws the add Gnaws? Or is it Force of Will?
I don't know if it was... I don't know if it was Force of Will or Mindbreak Trap. I remember it was one piece of permission that didn't really matter, or something like that. I think, again, like, maybe the Red Blast... like, holding up Red Blast turn 1 was, like, the hindsight right play, and that's why I made it card of the game, of, like, having a 1-mana counterspell in your deck if you're able to read that the T and K player is going to go crazy. Like, maybe it's the right play. Like, say the seat 2 and seat 1 and seat 3 are flipped, right? Joyra gets an extra turn, and Sisay has to Enlighten Tutor, or, like, maybe say Enlighten Tutor's a sorcery or something. And basically, like, the TNK shows me the Oppo for Lotus Petal earlier, before my turn. Maybe I don't cast the Ragavan. Maybe I hold up the Red Blast and I, like, play responsibly. But because it happened after the Ragavan, it's like, there's no way I'm holding up a Red Blast when all they've shown me is Soul Ring. Like, that's not scary enough.
Agreed. It's just unfortunate. But...
yeah, and I put it in my response. It's like, it was probably right to just cast the monkey, and sometimes you lose. That's how Magic goes.
Yep, you can play perfectly and still be wrong.
or even along the lines of, like, what you do doesn't matter.
Right. We're a mono red deck. Sometimes we just do not have a relevant reaction to what's happened at the table. So let's go to our round 6, which pretty cool. There's a Rafine in it. Seat 1 Rafine, then you on Magda, then Kinnan, then Timnacrom, and card of the game is Mindslaver. I'm assuming this is going to come in with the threatening it, but did Rafine do anything?
Rafine did do things.
Okay, cool.
Rafine did gross things, to be quite honest.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
The Rafine kind of single-handedly, like, without much pushback, just, like, won the game in one of the more spectacular tournament rounds I've ever seen. I think their draw was, like, Esper Sentinel into Douthie into Rafine into, like, go crazy. But the way that things ended up playing out was the Rafine got a turn ahead of me on board, basically, and was able to kind of preempt anything that I would do with a, you know, Tutor for Bowmasters or a removal spell or something like that. So I went turn 1 Dwarf into Mimic into Torque Magda, like, based on my opening hand. And, like, that's a pretty, like, solid curve out if you're not just, you know, terminally behind on board. The T&K played some advantage. The Kinnan tried to, like, get their commander out and play a bunch of rocks. And I think this game was really over from, like, turn 2 or 3, when the Rafine, like, connived for 2 onto their Esper Sentinel and discarded, like, a couple of meaningless cards, but just, like, had a full grip somehow. And I think throughout the game, they connived for something like 10 to 12 cards and only got those, like, 2 original counters on the Esper Sentinel. And so Rafine being able to just, like, filter out so many dead lands from their hands, their hand throughout the game, like, they just always had 7 spells to play, like, in their hand. They kind of got to choose, like, I get to play whatever my best 2-drop creature is on turn 4, and then hold up whatever the premium 2-mana interaction in the best interactive colors is. And I was really impressed with the Rafine deck, this specific way of building it, of just, like, powerful creatures that curve out and beat you to death. It wasn't like they won through some turbo tutor for Oracle, consult on top of it, easy win. They went to combat. They beat our faces in. And if they had been a little less far ahead, I think the threat of Mindslaver could have been a huge deal. Because the Kinnan immediately, when I said it, was like, yeah, I will help you. I will like counter, like, we need to Mindslaver this Ravine player. And the politicking of the card like was really relevant here. It let me basically like just get 2 counter spells out of the Kinnan's hand on things that were targeting my stuff when the Rafine cast them, because the Kinnan had bought into like me Mindslavering the Rafine as his only into the game. So the politicking aspect of just saying it's in my deck, I want to do it,
Right.
is something that I think a lot of people are going to listen to and going to like play towards, even if they might not for other cards that you can just go search for as like a safe search for the table. So I don't know. I put that it was the card of the game because I don't think much of what I did mattered after the Mulligan phase.
Gotcha.
I kept a hand that was just slower than Rafine, and that was the game. Kind of got either, you could say turn ordered, but you could also just say like color pied. Like Rafine gets more good creatures to play.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and you were 3-3, so that was that you didn't need the win, and then you were already in.
Good enough. And I think there was somebody else that like me and the T and K were already both for sure in. I think the Kinnan was likely in, and the Rafine was the only one who needed to win, and then they did. And so like almost all of us ended up in the top 16 from that pod.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about top 16. I know we'll talk about the round outside of your game afterwards, but let's start with the game. We have Timnacrom in first, followed by your Volo agent, followed by you, followed by Timnacrom. It was 2 TNKs, right? Or was it one of them a Tim Thras?
They were both TNK.
Okay, that's what I thought. And the cards of the game is J Will and Lifecraft. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Busted 3 drops in Magda.
Yeah.
Yeah, the opening hand was Barbarian Ring, Ragavan, Alan Gates, Jessica's Will, Lifecraft Engine. Pretty great 5. As far as things go, you want to see some 5-card hands like that when you're mulling that low. And the rest of the table just kind of like developed their own pieces. I think the seat 1 TNK played something. Volo tried to like follow up. It was like rocks or something, and then the 4th seat TNK, who is another regular, like played a turn 1 fish, like really standard kind of like safe plays from them. But being able to just like kind of generate some pretty quick and immediate advantage off of Ragavan, like again, this card is too dang good to be cut out of this deck. I think any dwarf would not have done for me this game what Ragavan did, because any dwarf doesn't let you turn 1 or turn 2 a Lifecraft here, and then turn 2 Lifecraft into turn 3 Magda plus so I go turn 1 Monkey, turn 2 Engine off of the treasure, and then turn 3 Magda attack with Engine, because I got one from Ragavan, I got one from tapping Magda, and I got one from tapping Engine. I'm at 3 treasures. Like, that's threatening 5 treasures plus Artifact Dwarf next turn. Like, I'm showing them a win on the table, and the rest of the table just, like, taps out. And what interestingly here happened is, like, I probably don't win this game if the Volo agent deck is a player with more experience. The TNK in seat 1 was the player from earlier who was Captain Yapper, and I guess not even Captain Yapper. He was like Yapper and Deputy Yapper in this round. But he like basically tried to talk the Volo player out of commandeering his Smothering Tithe, because the Volo player pitched a Gilded Drake to do it. And like steals the Smothering Tithe with the Commandeer. You know, everybody loves that, right? It's one hell of a dopamine hit to steal a 4-mana super potent advantage engine in a color that you don't play with Commandeer, which is like a card everybody wants to be good for some reason. But
yeah, even in decks that I want to play, like it makes sense to play it. It doesn't make sense to play it.
Because you live on that high of hitting the Smothering Tithe, and then like you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I could commandeer a counter spell. That's like the most likely outcome.
Honestly, it's not even that. It's that you see 2 turns later, ooh, if that commandeer had been literally another card, I would have preferred to have the other 2 blue counter spells that I pitched to this. Right. And that's really what it is. It's like the opportunity cost is not ever worth it. But
so
yeah, go ahead.
Even though I didn't have a ton of like acceleration, quote unquote, to like turn to the Jeska's Will with Magda out or something like that, you know, imagine a hand where you have like Mox Diamond land, you go Magda, and then you J-Will, and you like make 7 red, and you can win the game on the spot. Like those are great. But J-Will in its other mode here was actually just like I got to play through interaction. And I say that because the way that this game ended is the Volo player has committed and is just like, I'm going to cast my spell. The TNK player tells me after the fact, he's like, I really tried to talk him out of it, but he like said something like, yeah, you know, these players who are top 16ing their first big event, like they're happy to be here and they're going to be misplaying because it's late or whatever. And I'm like, it's dismissive, but fine. And without the Gilded Drake stealing my Magda, I'm happy to untap and I think I drew a land, so I didn't even have to sweat it. But like Windmill Slam the J-Will onto the table. It hit 5/6 mana off of the seat 4 TNK who had the Mystic Remora, but was tapped out. And it's important that they're tapped out. They're on 3 lands somehow, because this is my turn 4. That makes sense? Yeah. They're on 3 lands, and they're all tapped out. The seat 1 TNK has 2 mana open, and when I think I had... What did I do? There was a cool line here where I flipped over off Jeska's Will, some cards that don't matter, but importantly, there was a Galvanic Blast. And the... I attempt to move to combat with like 1 red floating left over after casting some other meaningless spell that I had either in my hand or had flipped over off of the J-Will. I like spend 4 mana to cast, you know, some artifact or something. And with like 1 red floating, I attempt to move to combat. The seat 1 TNK tries to snap my Magda back to my hand, and then the table kind of like pauses to think about it. Nobody really clearly says I pass priority, and I think any spectators might have thought that the priority had been passed because, you know, like we were kind of already thinking, like people were already kind of talking about like, okay, but what lands are you going to untap? And as soon as the player to my left, the seat 4 TNK, says, can you untap one of mine? I immediately like realize, okay, they're holding interaction. If this snap resolves, I'm then going to have to fight through a second piece of interaction. So I realize I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just blast my Magda. So I Galvanic Blast my own Magda, fizzle the snap. Neither player untaps lands. I use my remaining, like, just land mana to recast Magda, recrew the Lifecraft, because I crewed the Lifecraft before my Galvanic Blast resolved, to get my extra treasure, recrew the Lifecraft for another extra treasure, and proceed to win the game from there. Because I was able to kind of see in the moment, like, okay, I have the opportunity to kind of jump ahead of the table. People might be like, people might say, oh, you already passed priority, but you can't really like let their interpretation of, or let what you think the interpretation of your like table mannerisms are impact what you try and do when it's all face up, right? Like, I'm not giving up interaction by saying very quickly, like, okay, blast my Magda, like, in response to the snap. Because either Magda's going to my hand and I'm casting her for 2 mana into an interactive spell that the TNK has, or I'm like, okay, I just put her in the zone, make another treasure, we're chilling. And one of my friends was like, oh, that was such a sick play. And I look back on it and I'm like, it was kind of obvious. As soon as the player to my left says, like, oh, can you untap one of my lands? Like, now I'm really incentivized to
2-for-1 them.
2-for-1 myself, because it's not really a 2-for-1. It's like a 2-for-2 because it shuts off the interaction that the other player would have. And at that point, I'm just overwhelming their interaction by having more mana than them through Jeska's Will, and having more speed than them for my combo because of Lifecraft Engine. So I think both of those cards really showed their power in this game, which, like, nobody's shocked. They're great. They're in, like, Jeska's Will's in every red deck because it's so great. But Lifecraft Engine in our deck is so good in this regard, because I think if you can stick a Lifecraft Engine on, like, turn 1 or turn 2, your win percentage just goes up, like, massively. It is it's an artifact dwarf that isn't a creature, so it doesn't die to Bowmasters. Like, it's only an artifact dwarf when you want it to be, and that's a powerful effect to have.
That's been my biggest takeaway, is like, it dodges creature removal unless you are already winning, or
it dodges creature removal and you can get it under cage. Like, that's huge,
right? And it means you get to cut a bad card potentially.
Yeah.
Because you don't.
So I snag a win. I probably, like, if the other players had been playing a little tighter and a little faster and it wasn't 10 o'clock at night, things might go differently, and they might be like, oh, you already passed. Like, you can't blast. So the TNK to my left untaps a land. They get their like, ability to swords or whatever interaction they have, and my whole turn is a lot harder. I think I probably still beat swords there, just because, like, what are they gonna do? Swords my Lifecraft Engine? Like, they'll probably try and swords Magda, and then it'll be too late and we'll be chilling. But in that spot, I was just happy to have a kind of heads up play and opportunity to kind of sit and watch another player hunt to me and then be able to capitalize.
So I did not know that the other top 16, the pod from hell, had Gold Sabertooth and Sam Black in it.
Yes.
So we're going to do a quick aside. I want to try to wrap this up by around 11:15, 11:30. Not worried about it, but I think it's worth talking about, because I think it, the trials and tribulations is part of the fun. And good God, how long was it? 3 hours?
Okay. So we've established some context, which is that Gold Sabertooth, Tim Toronto, and Sam Black are both really enfranchised, really skilled players, and they're in a top 4 pod with the TNK from earlier, who in the Rafine game, who I said kind of just, like, cast a Smythe and, like, lost the game to the Rafine creature beatdown. But he, like, apparently was just kind of doing the same thing. He was there kind of along for the ride and happy to be in top 16, according to what Sam told me later, because the Madison crew's all friends with Sam, and the way the top 4 shakes out, like, we let him get away with a lot of shit he probably shouldn't, but we're friends with Sam. He's a pillar of our community to some degree, and I got his side of the story for this game. So take that as you will, anybody listening. You're getting the, like, winner's side when I tell you anything about this pod, and you're getting it from, like, third-hand knowledge. Go watch the stream. It's all streamed. That's the crazy part.
Oh my God, the poor event staff.
I love the Mana Vault guys. They're the best. They were happy to be there, making sales the whole time, playing side games, like, in the middle of the room. Like, the top 16 vibes at the Mana Vault are some of the best tournament vibes ever.
Cool.
But the vibes soured as this game went on for, according to the clock, 5.5 hours.
No, you're fucking me.
I am a little bit.
Okay.
Because the only reason it was 5.5 is because there was a daylight savings time change in the middle. It was
Yes.
4.5 hours of actually playing the game. But I will like always tell people the shock value number first.
That's a fun asterisk.
We started playing our top 16 pod at 10:15. We started playing our top 4 pod at 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So life is rough. In terms of everybody sitting there. The 2 remaining top 16 pods are the #1 point scorer on the top deck leaderboard, Andy Beach, a pretty strong TNK player who wrapped up their round pretty quickly, against another one of the Madison crew who top 16'd. Shout out William. He's a coworker of mine too. And then Aaron Lee, a really talented Sisse player from Madison as well. So it was in the top 16, the #1 player on the leaderboard, Sam Black, me, and another Madison grinder, and it was sick. That was like one of the best parts, and I think for me, Aaron, and Sam, like we had all really been hopeful going into this tournament that we were able to, show up for the Madison crowd against this massive field of 148 players of really enfranchised tournament grinders from across the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it shook out being like leaderboard, Sam Black, and then 2 Madison grinders on top of that was just, you couldn't write it up any better.
Awesome.
The downside of this is the time. Apparently the way the game played out, everybody kind of just played setup games, and Sam actually I think had the worst position in the game for most of it, is what he told me. But what he was doing was he was like politicking left and right and left and right and left and right as much as he could. So what he ends up doing at one point in the game is like playing a 1 ring to get protection and making a deal with Gold Sabertooth Tim on Marnius that Tim will only Hullbreaker because Sam can like mind break the Hullbreaker when Tim cast it. Sam basically gets to control where each of the Hullbreaker triggers goes. Once Tim makes infinite mana, I think was the way the deal worked out or something like that. And Tim ended up twisting the deal a little bit, but like holding true to most of it to his own detriment at one point, because he kills the other 2 players by like infinite Bowmaster pinging them, and that's the way that he has to win the game. He like somehow can't draw more cards, or is like locked somehow and like can't just like draw his deck to win the game because of the deal he made with Sam or something. And what ends up going on is that like Sam gets to untap after the Marnius player kills the Kinnan player with the Bowmaster, removing the stolen Valley Floodcaller from the Marnius's board. So he can't continue to Hullbreaker at instant speed, and then can't kill Sam in his upkeep when he loses 1 ring protection.
And that was all directed, so like...
Right.
Okay.
Or it wasn't quite directed, right? Like Sam basically is like, yeah, you can kill those 2 players. Like it wasn't like super directed of Sam saying you have to kill these 2 players. Like Sam says, oh, go for it. And Tim kind of makes the like small punt of doing that ends up costing him the game massively. But the game drags on for this long because of the kind of meta that we're in at this point. There was a point in time where the Kinnan had 3 Rhystic Studies in play. They had played their own, they had Steel Enchantmented someone else's, and they had Mirror Mated a 3rd Rhystic Study.
Love Mirror Maid.
And so the Kinnan player somehow manages to not win the game. The TNK player apparently sits there and doesn't do very much, according to what Sam said. There's a lot of details and like counter wars that get involved, but the basics of this are that there's a really long turn where the counter war ends with the Marnius deck that Gold Sabertooth is playing like solidly in the driver's seat, and somehow through this like politicking half deal of some sort that Tim has like held up enough to not win, but not held up enough that Sam has kind of like built up some like ill will, or what's a better way to say it is like Sam can kind of call Tim out a little bit and be like, you didn't hold up our deal, and like have some moral high ground to politic with. And the way that ends up working out is that I think after like a bunch of a really convoluted chain of vapor, Marnius's board was a bunch of non-lands and then one underground sea. Sam goes into his turn and like has enough counter magic, or Marnius doesn't have any counter spells or something like that, and is able to just overload a Cycrift, leaving Marnius with one underground sea in play, and the other two players already dead. And like it's pretty trivial to win a 1v1 when you have just resolved an 8 mana instant and your opponent has one underground sea in play. So the game ends up eventually finishing up at like 3:30 a.m. and everybody's amped to Sam's amped, everybody else is like kind of just ready to go home.
Right. Yeah, Tim's got a long drive to or maybe a flight. So was there a restart in that game?
I don't think so. I think it was just straight through. I think it was just a slow game with a ton of like Mystic Ristic and then Counter Wars where everybody just built up this giant hand. And I think what took most of the time was there was a turn that took a full like hour and a half.
All right.
That Counter War turn with the complex chain of vapor, like copy chain and like copy in the middle, apparently took just like a ridiculous amount of time.
All right, research and dwarf. I know you might eat lunch with Gavin even if you don't work with him. Ban Ristic, bud. Just make it happen. It's too much.
I don't like. Unfortunately, with the announcement of the bracket system, like it's not gonna happen. They're probably not gonna ban very much. If they'll just like stick it in as a game changer or move it up to like a, you know, this automatically makes you bracket 4 or whatever. Like I don't think we're getting a lot of commander bans coming up, so we're just stuck with Ristic, but. Whatever. I think the rest of the way the evening shook out was kind of fine and is a good kind of capstone for this whole tournament breakdown.
Yeah.
Because it'll show you like for these big money events, there's not a whole lot you can do in the final pods. You're always gonna have some sort of
shenaniganry,
right?
All right. So what happened?
We like the meta tournament stuff that I'll tell you about is that Sam Black is really open to and vocal about the tournament logistics part of Magic being something that you cannot kind of rules your way around if people want to just divide up the prizes kind of however they want. And the way that worked out for us is he sits down after like, you know, winning this super long game and he goes, I have not lost a game that I played all day. His only loss was when he didn't show up for a round.
Wait, what?
And his Taco Bell order was long and he was already locked for top 16 in round 5 and just called the tournament organizers and was like, don't drop me. I'm just going to forfeit this round.
Yeah.
So whatever ends up happening in this like top 4 is kind of a moot point from there. Like it's a 3-pod, so we agree on a prize split ahead of time. And I think if it wasn't 3:30 a.m. and because the prize pool of this tournament was so interestingly structured, I probably would have said like let's play it out, because by making top 4, you got $500 credit. And then the winner got a full set of 10 duels. Like that was a huge draw for people to come play. And honestly, I've been playing Magic for short enough that maybe outside of like someone's trade binder or like a Magic like shop's trade binder at a con, I don't think I've seen like a full set of 10 duels that is owned by an individual like sat on a table together.
Right.
So the idea of like winning the tournament and getting to like now have a set of all 10 duels that I can like put on a shelf or put in a binder is pretty sick.
Yep.
So I might have said we play it out if we
it wasn't 3:30 in the morning and Sam wasn't
had
on
that
the
5.5 hour game. Yeah. Sam's on a hot streak and Sam basically says like, I will offer the rest of the table. We split the prize pool 5 ways. I get 2 of the shares. You each get 1. I basically get double whatever you get. And the way that the shop cut that money is that each of us would get $1,000 in credit. Like a clean 1 rack. And at 3:30 in the morning, after playing Magic for 15 hours or like, you know, being at the card shop for 15 hours, like a clean rack is pretty nice to walk away with.
Right.
And so I say, fine, we'll split the money. And Sam goes, great, I concede. I don't care about the top deck points. I'm already locked for the like invitational, like if I want to go to it even. And he just like walks out of the room. So we play this little 3-pod. I mulled a 6. It had a slow. I had a slow like 3-land 3-spell hand. The important part was that it was 2 basic mountains, so that I could play through like whatever. If I top decked a Mox Diamond or a Blood Moon or whatever, I wouldn't really be impacted by any of my top decks.
Sure.
And I had an Artifact Dwarf, and I think I had a J-Will, so like I could turbo out some stuff if I like made it to turn 4, but I didn't have anything to slow down whatever TNK did. And so in the 3-pod setting, TNK knew how to play it against one blue deck and me, which is to just go like mull to 1 tutor plus counterspell plus whatever else your deck needs, because you have so many like versatile combo pieces that as long as you just like draw one of them, you're fine. Yeah, farm went like turn 1 Mystic Remora, turn 2 Rhystic Study, and both of their game plans were just like kill Magda, kill Sisay on sight. And so I kind of was falling behind really fast. I ended up feeding some cards to the TNK, Mystic Rhystic to like try and keep up, but they just drew Oracle Consult, and they drew or tutored into Oracle Consult on the TNK side, and then when the Sisay like played, I don't remember what exactly like the counter spell itself was. Like they just like the Sisay was down enough mana that they couldn't pay for the Rhystic Study trigger, and the TNK player like draws the card off Rhystic, and then you can tell because they don't move their hand at all, like they don't shuffle it around or whatever, they don't stop and think, they just like drop the Flusterstorm on the table, and it's like that's the game.
Yep.
And I didn't have I think the Sisay had like maybe, one, like a swat or something. Like maybe they could have swatted one of the Flusterstorms to like counter 2 of them or something. But and because he looked at me and he was like, do you even have like a Red Blast or something to counter one of these? I'm like, nah, I got nothing. And we lose the game. And one Andy Beach takes the title, and I believe is now like either uncatchable or close to it on the top deck leaderboard with like 1,500 points. Like massive props to him. He's been on a tear.
Good for him, buddy.
So yeah, the top 4 was scuffed. We split the prizes, played for the points. That's kind of how most of the Mana Vault top 4s play out, because they offer like very competitive pricing. And a lot of people will just take their money.
The pricing sounded pretty good, and everyone gets to go home an hour early.
Right?
Yeah.
But I got I got in my car, and I told a couple of my other Madison friends who were still chilling, because one of them was Aaron, who was in the pod with me. They were carpooling with Sam on the way back to Madison. I was like, call me on Discord and like let me hear how Sam breaks down that top 16 pod. I want to hear the story. And I got the story on the drive home, and it was a nice way to like stay awake for the hour and a half drive.
Good deal. Honestly, that sounds like a fun tournament outside of the 3.5 hours of waiting past what a normal game should take.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Outside of that, sounds like a really fun go.
I love the Vault. If you're ever in Milwaukee or have an excuse to come up to one of the Vault tournaments, I highly recommend it. There's a bar next, like it's not even next door, it's like literally attached. It's in the same building. So in between rounds, people are just like grabbing a drink, grabbing a chicken sandwich or a basket of cheese curds. Like the Mana Vault just has a great space for it. So I like it.
So me at when we were at Play to Wins at Cloud City up in somewhere in the Poconos, the third round was taking so long because I believe Estelle Lee Stack War had turned the last pod in the round untenable and just completely unable to like finish in a timely manner. So there was like a 45-minute overrun. So like 20 minutes into it, we're just like, there's a bar in this mall. So me and Tor run to the bar and just pound back a beer, go back to the game, or go back to the store, and then I get my 2 wins that I needed to bubble in, and I bubbled out. But it was close. The beer made a difference. I was very chill for the last 2 games.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked the vibe that this particular Mana Vault event had because they had bought out the whole like front of house that the bar place to basically have enough table space for the extra players because
fun.
it was like more than double their normal attendance, right? Like
Right.
they usually run 64 player capped events because they don't have more room, and they do the top deck gold events like that fill every month. But the big 148 like diamond event for the anniversary, they like booked out the whole front of house. So
Sure.
basically the entire bar was also people playing Magic, and it was just a great vibe. So if you're, as I said, if you're ever incentivized, this is to any Magda players, stay out of my pods. But if you're listening to this, come to the Mana Vault. It's fun.
See, I like Magda mirror matches. I think they're fun.
I
and
like
interesting.
going ahead of the other Magda in seat order.
I just like having a better deck than them.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Right? If I can have better mana, then it doesn't matter what seed order I'm in.
Fair enough.
Anyway, let's cap this off.
Just play turn 1 Bloodfire Dwarf and then go, yeah, you can't play Magda, man.
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm gonna. I have sideboarded for you. So we've talked about like how you felt about the deck, what you would do, what you would change. We've already talked about that, and I think we'll post your more recent list or your new version list in the description to give people like A versus B.
Yeah,
I have a backup, so I'll just link that as well.
Oh yes, if you can just make a copy of that, we can just.
I already have it.
Oh, beautiful. We've talked about moles and politicking and especially like the spots where you could have done better. I guess the couple of questions that here at the end. What cards are you like anticipating liking that you're about to try out, or you've just slotted in? Like, what are you anticipating like just doing well?
Yeah. Probably City of Traders, right? Like we talked about Soul Lands being good.
Yeah.
I'm interested to try out the Goblin Engineer Cursed Mirror package, especially because I recently shifted around some utility lands and cut both of the like basically just legendary mountains that had extra text to commit crimes for Crime Magda. I cut those for Arena of Glory and Homeward Path. Both of which have like marginal upside. I think I'm on enough mountains that I'm not too scared of Arena of Glory being untapped or being a tapped source. But I'm excited to see how that plays with Goblin Engineer too, because one of the only reasons the Goblin Engineer is still like fringe playable in Modern is that you can haste it with Arena of Glory, and Arena of Glory giving Gimli haste, giving any of your dwarves haste. Like I don't know, it seems really strong. And when you're already hitting all your land drops, like I'm on 33 lands, I'm not scared of exerting it either.
33 is insane to me, but like
31 and then 2 MDFCs.
That's still, you mean, go off, King. You're in the top 4, not me. But
right, I love hitting lands, and when I can mulligan and put back a land, I'm happy with that too, right? Like you saw, I said it at least once here. Across 8 rounds, I kept 7 cards twice, and one of them was a second 7, I think. So I don't know. My experience with this deck is I expect stuff to do well based on like just the fact that the cards are good. And so I think the only cases where maybe that isn't possible or isn't the case in Magda is like I'm hesitant about Mirror the Forebears.
Yeah.
I put it back in because I think I was really impressed by the Lifecraft engine effect of being a creature when I needed it to be and not when I didn't want it to be. And so I'm trying out Mirror. I'm less hopeful about that one, and I put Return the Favor back in because I don't know, the card's great.
Card is so good.
Cards just great, like great when you have the like high points of it, but it's also one that I see sitting in my hand a lot. Like it's 3 mana, it's an instant that you have to hold up. I'm a fan of all of the like 1 mana instants, so I don't know. I'm not super sold on it, but I do expect that like Goblin Engineer Cursed Mirror is gonna really impress me. I think both of those are cards that I'm really happy to have, both because they're like permanents that I can have sticking around for multiple turns, but also just because they're flexible. And more tutors allows you to get the good cards that you need for a certain pod.
Right.
Other than that, I don't know. I haven't made a ton of like updates from my core package. I was off Chrome Mox for a while because the card disadvantage is just so rough. When you have to imprint a real spell and so much of the deck is already artifacts that like you
Right.
can't do that, right? Like there were a couple times where I had a hand that if one of my like card disadvantage like mana acceleration pieces had been a Chrome Mox, I would have had to pitch a really good card to not, because I couldn't pitch anything else because like my red cards were artifacts. You can't put Twin Shot Sniper under it. You can't put Curse Mirror under it. You can't put any of your colorless artifacts under it just because of the obvious reasons. But I don't know. I'm likely to continue like thinking about Chrome Mox. It's really in that middle ground. So I'm expecting to like the lands I put in the deck. Surprise, surprise for me. I play a lot of them. So I don't know. There's a pretty good chance that I end up testing out a bunch of these cards over the next like month, just like slotting them in one for another. So yeah, I'm hopeful that I have some more success with some of them and have like really well thought out reasons for including them, rather than just like, I don't know, sounds fun.
All right, cool. Well, I hope you give us, share with the class, man. When you
Absolutely.
do. What I'll say about the Goblin Cursed is that it's that one. It's a not on board element, right? You get to you get to basically play sneaky with whatever you have in the graveyard because it's not quite it's one step removed and they have to just kind of guess.
Or it's still in your deck, right? Like you get Curse Mirror with the first one.
Yeah.
And then it's like what? You pay a red to put the Curse Mirror into play, and then that's a Goblin Engineer with haste that gets you something else, so you pay another red. It's like 2 red, put 2 red, sack 2 artifacts, put whatever you need out of your deck in play. Like that seems pretty.
Oh yeah, no,
The 2 artifacts part is very costly.
It's very costly, but the fact that it can be something relevant, like it doesn't necessarily have to be treasure. It could be a tapped rock or something like that. It
could be a great furnace. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's why we run it. I'll say it has been great, and it plays into that as much as I can keep out of my opponent's view as possible, the better. And RTF is much the same way. They think, oh, I've got one piece of interaction from Magda, so I'm gonna go power down, except for the one piece I have. And then gotcha bitch on top of the piece of interaction that blanks it because you got Lifecraft Engine instead because it was an OBM or something. Like that, it's just good.
I've had the opposite experience with the card lately to the point where like I'm considering removing it because it's either face up that like you're politicking with the table because you need specifically Grafdigger's Cage in most cases to deal with something at the table, and that's what they're comfortable protecting. Otherwise, like the Cursed Mirror stuff, you need very specific board states for you to really get the most out of it. And a lot of times, if you don't have like a fast mana hand, Engineer comes down off curve and you're just like, what do I do now? And those times feel really bad.
Sure.
And even when you do have fast mana, like, sure, it's going to go get you your Lifecraft engine, but if you don't have like the board state where you can do the double tutor stuff, like you're putting Lifecraft in grave, there is a significant cost to playing face up with the thing in the graveyard. Not that, because like most decks, a majority of their removal, unless they are like a 3-color black deck or Dimir, don't have a lot of single target interaction that's just raw removal, and using it on Engineer in most cases is not something people are usually going to do. Because the majority of the things in the format are bounce spell, right?
Yep.
So like, the risk of it dying isn't very high, which is why it's still okay. But like for me, just especially playing mid range versus playing like Stax, where you have a lot more choices that can be made depending on board state. The card just is very underwhelming. And if it wasn't like a backup win condition through Grafdigger's Cage in certain situations, like with Agatha's, I I probably don't think it's worth playing.
Yeah, I'll be testing it, and I think it's gonna be really. It's one of those cards where I have a feeling it'll be really obvious when it's bad. You know, I had a moment. I love testing like cards that are just so, or even just playing like, and I know that they're bad. I love playing like fun of one ofs in this deck in particular because they don't matter that much.
Right.
Like obviously, if I'm going to one of these tournaments, like I'm not gonna be playing really any of those fun of one ofs. But I think like right now in my list, I'm low on them. But you know, if you were looking last week, I had Grim Reaper's Sprint in the deck. If you look at my considering section, I have stuff like Ruination and Eldritch Immunity and Boil and all of these like ridiculous cards that probably shouldn't see play.
I think
Just sitting in my considering list because they're relevant. You know, I could probably play a Smuggler's Buggy and it would be a decent card some of the time, but it would be bad the rest. And so there's all of these random like cards that are going to be coming in and out of the list, and I'm hopeful that I can maybe like pay attention more to the Discord this year now that I'm kind of off my yearly break and share some of my learnings with the Dwarven Horde. But in the meantime, I mean, I'll just keep testing stuff. Madison's a great training ground for players, and I'm looking forward to playing more of these top deck events and hopefully giving you an update on the next one I top 4.
All right, glad to hear it.
Are you planning on going to any events not in your local vicinity?
I think it'll depend. I mean, it's hard. I have a lot of travel this year for family stuff kind of planned, so slotting it into my schedule will be tough, but we'll see.
Well,
I want to. It'll just be like whether I can, time and money wise.
Rip and Chip's doing a thing in May.
And then you have the 20K. Yeah, the 20K in Pennsylvania. No, Rip and Ship is in
Long Island.
They're doing it at Long Island Con.
Okay, and then isn't the 20K the same weekend as the Invitational?
It's in the same city as the Invitational as well.
I thought, is it not the Invitational?
I don't know if it is.
There's a 20K Open, and the thing is, like, I was talking to Sam. It's like I almost want to play the Open. Like the EV of the Open might be better with a 20K prize pool.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
Also,
it's a 15K prize pool for a 64-man tournament though. So like.
Right, but it's like 64 killers.
Right. It's like, okay, am I gonna get like blown the fuck out in the first two rounds and then play the worst of those 64 for the rest of the tournament? Yeah, probably.
Or more along the lines of like, I don't know, Magda thrives when there's a player at the, like even just one player at the table slipping up can really open a window for us to win. And my particular take on the deck, as we talked about a lot at the beginning, is to jump in that open window and slam it shut as fast as possible. So like, I don't know, there's advantage for my particular style of the deck too, to play against, you know, relative fish at an open like that. So we'll see what events I go to, but you know, I've already taken up enough of your time, so I hope you.
No, you're fine. Last question: yeah. How do you feel about Magda in the overall meta? On the upswing, on the downswing, just doing okay.
Doing okay. I think on the upswing, as always, Magda's like got this really steady trajectory of like we get a new broken card printed about once a year. You know, last year it was Roaming Throne. This year it's Lifecraft Engine. Like we just get a new busted card. Bark form, yeah, absolutely. Like we just get a new busted card that makes the deck like hum a little bit smoother every year.
I mean,
and so I think because of that like highly synergistic nature of the deck and not necessarily relying on just the best cards in a certain color, we're going to have a weird spot in the meta of being like a clearly broken, really powerful commander that has a lot of moving parts and synergies that just get the benefit of new cards, but is like strongly limited by the one color and one toughness of said commander.
Yeah, unless Ristic or Bowmasters gets the axe somehow, or anti-draw becomes relevant, and like
I think the other thing about Magda that's interesting is if the points structure for tournaments change, every deck's position shakes up. Like there's a lot of cards and the way people play changes if draws are suddenly 0 points, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think that a lot of people playing for draws and accepting intentional draws instead of playing to win or lose the game are doing so at a rate that is unsustainable for long term. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing if that ever changes and how that shifts our relative position as a deck that grinds with the best of them.
Yeah, I've heard.
Or at least you can build it to do so.
Rust has run 0 draw tournaments or 0 point draw tournaments at his local, and he said he didn't like it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So it's like
they still ended up drawing like almost all the games.
Yeah. It's.
I mean, you can just slow play it, right? Like you have to.
I think it's honestly just the cards in the meta more than like people's play patterns necessarily. I think it's hard. It's very easy to get into the position that Tim and Sam and co found themselves in.
Right.
But I think that's where we'll end it. Thank you so much for your insight, the soapboxing, the entertaining walkthroughs, just a good conversation. I think people are going to get a lot out of this episode. And for once, I'm actually going to listen to it while I do the time stamping, so that we can find all the cards we're talking about as we're talking about them. Because usually I just do it based on slide, so I'm going to spend a little bit extra time there. Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. Dwarves stronger together, all that good stuff. Keep mining them dubs.